Hey guys, it's Jessica.
And this is Kendra, and you're listening to Lucid Lab. We're really tired and maybe kind of hungover this morning. Don't fall asleep over there. We had a really fun night last night, though.
It was so fun.
It was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be a hard one to record today.
It's going to be really hard because we're recording 2 today.
Yes.
And then we both ended up with really long episodes somehow.
Right.
We weren't planning on it, but...
And we had a little get together at my house last night with a couple other girls, and we got a little crazy, silly, whatever.
We did Cards Against Humanity.
Which, if anyone has ever played that, you have so much fun.
It was my first time.
And we went through the entire black deck, so anyone who knows the game knows how long we were playing. We just wanted to read them all.
I was often offended.
That's the whole point of the game. We had to keep telling Jessica.
I had a hard time.
We had to keep saying, this is not how we actually feel. That's the way the game works, is you're trying to be offensive and you're thinking of the most off the wall or the most horrendous answer you possibly can.
At first, I wasn't getting any cards because I was thinking too logically, I think. Then I got over the hump and I came in second.
You came back strong. But
apparently there's someone else who always wins. So
yes. She got all the good cards. That's how she won. That's what I'm going to stand by.
I don't understand. She knew my brain, though, because I kept picking her every time.
Yep.
Even when I was intentionally trying not to.
Same.
I still would pick her.
And most of the times I was like, I know it's her answer, but it's the best. So whatever. Whatever. I'm okay losing games, really.
Oh, yeah.
I am not like have to win. Of course, everyone enjoys winning. It was fun. But now we're running on very little sleep and... We're talking about very serious things.
We are.
So
yeah.
We'll get some coffee or whatever to keep us going.
I have peppermint under my nose right now.
And now your nose is running.
Yep. So what are we doing today?
So I'm taking us down the serial killer path.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I haven't done one in a while. I'm talking about Kenneth McDuff.
And I don't know anything about him.
So most people don't, which to me is kind of crazy that he's not more prominent out there.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there's just a lot of serial killers to choose from, and maybe
really
that's
is.
why he's not. What he did and the way that things happen actually led to laws being changed in the state of Texas.
Okay.
For me, it's very personal because Kenneth McDuff was actually active where I grew up.
Oh.
And it was happening when I was around 12 years old.
Ooh,
so
that's scary.
I remember this being all over the news, and there were big billboards of some of the women that were missing at the time, but they had not connected it back to Kenneth McDuff yet. So this brought back a lot when I started reading the book about him and looking up things. It's all like in my backyard. I grew up in a really, really small protected area. Bell County is not known for any kind of crime, and to know that one of the most, he is, I think to this day, still the most notorious serial killer in Texas.
Okay.
Grew up right around the corner from where I did.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So Kenneth McDuff's notoriety results not just from the frightening nature of his crimes, which we'll go through, but also from the journey that returned him to death row after he was paroled.
Oh.
See, Kenneth McDuff has been on death row twice.
How does that happen?
That's what we're all saying. This is why laws were changed. He is the only convicted killer in American history to have been assigned 2 different death row numbers and sentenced to 2 different forms of execution.
Wow.
He was paroled in 1989 after being put into prison for killing 3 people. He was on death row. He got off of death row, and they let this man out.
That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
At all.
Going through this, you're going to be shocked and appalled by how poorly our justice system can react sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. You're going to die. How does that turn into you being let out of jail?
How indeed. He's a true monster. So let's talk about Kenneth McDuff and how these kind of people exist in the world.
Kenneth is my grandpa's name, by the way.
Is it?
Darn.
So when I went off to college in Texas A&M, I took a 3-hour drive between Belton, where I grew up, to get to College Station. The way that I could go, there were 2 ways. One way was this small, like little 2-lane country roads, and there was no town. So when I wanted to just like get somewhere quick, I would go that way, and there were usually no cops, and so I would go way faster than I should.
Yeah.
The other way was to go through a bunch of little towns. It took longer, but then if I needed to stop for gas or get food or whatever, I could. And one of those towns that I stopped in quite often was Rosebud, Texas. And Rosebud, Texas is a town that was pretty much like one stoplight with what we called a Texas stop sign.
Okay, what's that?
A Dairy Queen.
Oh.
So it had the Texas stop sign because every town in Texas had a Dairy Queen growing up.
Interesting. That was the first place I ever worked, was a Dairy
Is it
Queen.
really?
Yeah.
I never go to Dairy Queen these days.
I don't either. I mean, every now and then I'll get a little child who begs me
for a
to.
Blizzard?
Yeah,
or,
a Blizzard.
I do love a good Reese's Blizzard.
I'm a M&M Blizzard gal.
Are ya?
Yeah.
Now I kind of want one, probably because
I
I'm hungover.
I got some cake still.
Do you?
Yeah. Which your cat dropped, remember?
He was just helping.
We had, quick side note.
Yeah, I was about to say we have to talk about everyone meeting my cat last night.
I loved her cat. He is so freaking adorable. He just played with my feet, my dress, and my hands all night because me and Kendra were sitting on the floor playing the game and they were sitting on the couch.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of fun with him. But while we were playing, he got up on her counter and he knocked over another girl who was there. She had cupcakes that she brought. He knocked those over and they fell inside the container. And then he got back up and he knocked over my cake and it fell inside the container.
Fortunately, it all stayed in the containers.
But
so
we had some smushed goodies.
We didn't take pictures of it. It wasn't pretty, but it tasted amazing.
It was funny.
He just added his little signature to it.
Yep.
Yeah, I have to get my kitten trained because he loves being on the counters and getting into everything.
Yep. It was entertaining.
He is so entertaining.
Okay, back to it. Sorry.
So we're back in Rosebud, Texas, and the Dairy Queen. This is a town that is embarrassed that Kenneth McDuff came from there. They still cringe at it to this day. If you go in and say, what do you think of Kenneth McDuff? They will all say, he was trouble from the beginning. All of us knew it. And most of the town was afraid of him from a young age. I'm talking like 8th grade.
That's not good.
So the McDuff family would move to Rosebud. We don't really know why. They came from Paris, Texas, which I also have aunts and uncles who lived in Paris, Texas. So all of this is just weird. But they moved there. It was John Allen McDuff, and he went by J.A., and his wife, Addie. And they had 5 children when they moved to Rosebud. They had 3 girls and 2 boys. The youngest boy was Kenneth McDuff.
Oh, wow. The youngest.
He's the youngest boy. He was born on March 21st, 1946. So this makes him an Aries, which honestly kind of will fit his personality in a lot of ways to me.
Okay.
Not that all Aries are serial killers. Just the way that he feels entitled and likes to be center of attention.
Okay.
Can fit the bad qualities of an Aries because we all have bad qualities within our zodiac. Like I said, he was the youngest boy, but they ended up having one other child, another little girl after Kenneth. So total of 6 kids.
Okay.
The McDuffs weren't the friendliest family in Rosebud, and some would describe them as just downright weird. But they were hard workers. They kind of worked their way up. Addie McDuff, she was the one who wore the pants in the family. She was described as a large, domineering woman. She ruled over all 4 daughters and 2 sons. She did all of the discipline, and J.A. kind of just let her do it.
Okay.
He was a workaholic, at first doing farm work, and then he had like stroke of good luck when he opened a cement finishing business at the time when there was like a boom in building in Temple, Texas, which is a sister city to where I grew up. And the family actually moved from probably being like lower middle class to like solid middle class. They were able to buy a nicer home.
Okay.
The laundromat that Addie McDuff ran was right across the street from their family home. It was described by people in the area that Addie was kind of someone people were afraid of in a way. She was a large woman. She wasn't real friendly.
I'm kind of picturing Rose West.
It kind of reminds me, or even of Fred's mom.
Oh, okay.
That's who I picture. And I actually didn't see any pictures of Addie, but we'll talk a little bit more about her in a minute.
Okay.
Kenneth was her favorite child. It wasn't even a secret.
Why is the favorite always the serial killer? I'm just kidding. It just
It's true.
There seems to be some kind of thing with that, though.
There is something about that. And it wasn't just Addie, but the 3 older daughters also like lavished attention on Kenneth. They just treated him like oh, he's the sweet baby boy. I picture how I like lavish all my attention on my baby kitty boy right now. They were doing this. And
weird.
Even though he wasn't the true baby of the family, he got all of that attention. I don't know what happened to his youngest sister. I don't even see much about her when reading through this story. So she was just kind of the extra child. I feel sad in a way. And it wasn't just Kenneth. His brother Lonnie was also like treated in a different way than the girls. It was just something about this family. The boys were so important, which is odd to me because Addie, in her relationship with J.A., she wasn't subservient to him in any way. In fact, he was subservient to her, but yet she raised her boys to be kind of...
Maybe so that they'd take care of her later in life?
Maybe, but it was a dangerous way to raise him. And I saw this in every article that I looked up, was just how Addie was spoiling him in many ways and teaching him kind of that he was...
superior,
above everyone, and what he said was true and what he did was good, and there were no repercussions for Kenneth growing up. There was an entry in Kenneth McDuff's prison files stating that when he was a youth in school that he was never required to follow the rules because any attempt to discipline Kenneth was certain to bring Addie McDuff rushing into the school, furious that something was going on, and sometimes she would even show up carrying a pistol.
Oh, geez.
In the town of Rosebud, she was called Pistol Packing Mama McDuff.
Wow.
So
Are you sure this is Texas or is this Louisiana? I'm just kidding.
She was described as a bit of a conspiracist when it came to her children. She believed that everyone was just out to get the kids, specifically Kenneth, but also all of her children. So the schools really didn't want to mess with the McDuff children because they didn't want to see pistol packing mama showing up in the office.
How can you go to a school with a gun? That doesn't make any sense. Why she wouldn't get arrested or something like that.
Small town Texas in the 70s.
Okay.
Or actually, this is in the 50s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll go back to J.A., who was Kenneth's father. He was described as just being a very quiet man who just went to work and left all the family matters, all the discipline, everything to his wife.
Was she like abusive towards him or anything?
I didn't see anything about abuse within this family.
Okay.
Maybe it was going on and we don't know, but there was nothing like no incest or anything creepy like what we saw with Fred and Rose, other than her kind of worshiping her children in a way, especially her boys, and telling them that they're the most perfect thing God ever created.
Okay.
Which is very dangerous. And then anytime they got in trouble, there were no repercussions. It was just, oh no, you're a good boy. They just don't like you. They just don't like our family. Everyone's out to get us.
Yeah.
So you're building this kid up to be above the law in a lot of ways.
Right.
With this, Lonnie and Kenneth would get in trouble quite often. And there were stories around town about Addie showing up when there was a fight on the bus and cursing out the school bus driver because he had thrown the kids off the bus for fighting. There was also a story of Lonnie pulling a knife on the Rosebud school principal.
Oh, wow.
Guess who came up showing her pistol or whatever, and how dare you try and suspend my child? I'm sure you did something for him to pull a knife on you.
Yeah. My brain wants to say pistol whipping Addie. The other one takes too long.
Pistol packing.
Pistol packing mama.
So Kenneth also took pleasure in bullying classmates and intimidating his teachers because he knew he could. He had his mom protecting him always. Classmates remember that he loved to gamble, and he would get children to like offer up their lunch money.
Oh.
And then he would cheat and make sure he always won. He had an IQ of 92, so he wasn't the brightest guy in the class. He actually liked to call attention to this. Like he would make a 0 or like a 20 on a test, and he would show it to everyone in the class and just say, I don't give a damn. So he was kind of one of those guys that's like, yeah, I'm too cool for school or whatever. They also all say that he had a maniacal laugh.
Ooh, okay.
And he would usually laugh at things that no one else thought was funny. psychopath there.
Yeah.
Not only did he have this maniacal laugh, but they said he would be like maniacally laughing and then all of a sudden just go really serious and get this like overcast glare.
Like you're doing at me right now.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm trying to recreate. So people knew he was weird and something was up and they didn't want to mess with him.
Not someone you want to get stuck in a room with.
All of the children were afraid of him. He had no real friends. His only friend was Lonnie, his older brother. Lonnie was almost as bad as Kenneth himself. He didn't really have any friends either. So you had these two brothers that I just see all of the cliches of the bullies in school. That was them.
Yeah.
And they would just be stealing lunch money, making fun of people, laughing. And the teachers couldn't do anything about it, and not even the principal.
Yikes.
There is one story that everyone still recalls to this day in Rosebud, and they think it's the one time that McDuff was kind of taught a lesson. He had been picking on this little boy named Tommy Salmon. He was one of the football players that everybody loved. It was 8th grade. Kenneth was quite large, eventually growing to 6'4" and 250 pounds. He was bigger than every other kid around, and he started challenging this kid, Tommy Salmon, who was quite a bit smaller than him. And he said, I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to beat you up. And then finally, Tommy had enough, and he said, sure, let's do it. We'll meet in the field after school. You can take me out, Kenneth. He was just done with him. They showed up, and everyone was there in the schoolyard watching, and the fight only lasted 2 minutes. And even though McDuff was larger than Tommy, Tommy knew how to fight.
Oh.
He took him down. The fight was over in 2 minutes, and it embarrassed the fuck out of Kenneth, and he never picked on Tommy again. And in fact, a few months later, he quit school altogether.
Wow. Go Tommy.
So Tommy's kind of the hero, and they'll still talk about him today. In every article I read, this story was always brought up. A lot of people said that Tommy liberated the school by taking down the bully. It sounds like a movie.
It really does.
So after he dropped out of school, he just went to work for his father at the concrete business. In his prison records, there was a quote from the principal at Rosebud High School that said, Kenneth did not get along with other students, teachers, or anyone. He would lie, steal, and destroy the property of others. He had trouble in the community for reckless driving and stealing. His family would seldom believe he did anything wrong and were always angry with school officials and local police for punishing him. This young man has been angry with the world ever since he was in the 4th or 5th grade. So this was submitted in the prison records when they were talking about paroling him. There was a lot of records you could read, and I just thought it was an interesting quote. So Kenneth's out of school by age 14, and he is working for his father. He has now, by the age of 16, grown to be that full 6'4", 250 pounds.
That's a lot.
His size was intimidating to those around him, and he took joy in that. He knew that he was intimidating, and he would harass smaller boys and, just kind of jump at them and watch them run. He thought that was fun. In the spring of 1964, he began a string of burglaries around Rosebud and neighboring towns. He ended up breaking into about 14 different businesses to just take off with the money from the till. He was finally caught by Temple, Texas police, and he said he shouldn't be arrested because he was just a young boy, and they should know that it was just him and some boys pulling pranks.
But they took money. That's not a prank.
But this is just setting up like how he sees the world.
Okay.
He's like, why are you coming after me? I'm just a 16-year-old kid. Like, every kid does this. This is when we would start seeing it take a dark turn because he started confiding to other boys that he ran around with that he liked grabbing women and raping them. He confided to Lonnie, his brother, in the fall of 1964 that he had raped a woman, he had cut her throat, and he had left her for dead in a ditch.
Oh, no.
And Lonnie, his brother, who once again isn't much better than Kenneth, said, you should just forget about it and go to bed. This could have been his first victim.
Yeah.
We'll find out later that women will come forward and say that they were assaulted by him in this time.
Okay.
Fortunately, he did get taken off the streets because everything started catching up to him because he was continuing to rob local businesses. And in January of 1965, he was convicted of 8 counts of burglary in Bell County, 2 in Falls County, and 4 in Milam County. He was sentenced to a total of 52 years in prison.
Jeez.
He was getting 4 years for each of the 14 counts of burglary. However, the problem is that the sentence was to be served concurrently. So for all practical purposes,
4.
he was only sentenced to 4 years.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
He was entered into prison for the first time in March of 1965, but only 9 months later, he was paroled for the first time.
Why even say concurrently?
I don't get it. But yeah, just say 4 years for all of it. Like,
just, it's stupid.
52.
But we have 4 per each, but at the same time. Multiple dimensions.
And how do you get paroled? If you have that many, you shouldn't have even been offered for parole. If you have 14 counts, you should serve that full 4 years. He served 9 months.
That's crazy.
Kenneth McDuff underwent a subtle but kind of a deadly change following that first parole. It reinforced the idea that he was above the law.
Mm-hmm.
Also, while he was in prison for 9 months, he made a lot of friends in there. That was like his kind of people. And it really changed him from being like this 16-year-old, very dangerous child still. But it's like he
grew up a little
morphed into a dangerous fucking man after this.
He saw that there's other people like him.
And he felt invincible, kind of, in a way.
He's a bad boy. I'm sitting here because she has the book that she was reading.
The book that I read called Bad Boy from Rosebud. And he's definitely that.
Yep.
Something else he learned in prison was that he enjoyed finding smaller, weaker men that could be kind of his sidekicks.
Oh.
And he would tell them all these stories of the women that he raped and the burglaries that he did. He liked to tell a lot of stories. Some of them were true. Some of them may not be. He was just one of those guys who liked to spin a yarn.
Mm-hmm.
But some of these younger, impressionable kids, I guess is what they would be, looked up to him. They thought he was a badass. He was this big, scary guy. And he learned how to kind of manipulate those people. And one of those unfortunate companions, his name is Roy Dale Green.
Is this in or out of jail?
I'm sorry. He's out of jail now. So he has been paroled and he's back on the streets. He's back working for his dad. And he meets Roy Dale Green while working for his dad. Kenneth is now 20 years old and Roy Dale is 18.
Okay.
He was mesmerized by all of Kenneth McDuff's tales of being with girls. And he also began telling all of his, I can't say friends because they weren't really friends, but he would tell his brother and then these, you know, dudes that would just listen to him and look up to him, how much he enjoyed inflicting pain on women during sex.
Okay.
He would tell stories of burning cigarettes on women's vaginas. And one of the more brutal things that he did, he actually took Roy Dale with him after he picked up a girl and he pinned the girl to the floor and he squirted a tube of deep heat, which is like icy hot, into her vagina.
Oh my God. Oh.
And they sat there and watched and laughed. And this
she could have got a chemical burn or something with that. Like, she had to end up in the hospital.
It gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Oh my God.
He was into sadism in the worst kind of way. He also began bragging to Roy Dale that he had already raped and strangled several women by this time. And he said, killing a woman's like killing a chicken. They both squawk. Roy Dale, although he had seen this happen, he didn't really believe that McDuff was killing the women. He thought he was just having sadistic sex with them. But all of that's going to change one night in August of 1966. So it was Saturday, August 6th, 1966. Roy Dale and he had been working in Temple, Texas that morning pouring concrete. And after work, they were going to get cleaned up and head to Fort Worth to meet some girl that Kenneth McDuff was supposedly seeing. Now, I didn't mention that Kenneth, he's 20 now. He's a good looking guy.
Okay.
He's a tall, kind of dark, brooding looking guy. So he easily attracted women, which is always dangerous for a serial killer.
Yeah.
Even though he was doing these horrible things to the girls, you think they would talk to each other, but he literally had a different girl every week, kind of a guy.
Oh, wow.
And he wasn't mean to all of them. Some of them he would date. And he actually met some of them at the church.
Okay.
It's like this whole paradox here. And who he chooses to hurt versus not.
Interesting.
So he was going to meet this girl in Fort Worth. Roy Dale hadn't gotten out much. He'd never even been to Fort Worth in his life. He's 18 and he was so excited that Kenneth was going to take him to Fort Worth and they were going to meet girls.
Sounds like the dream.
Yeah. So they met up with this girl that Kenneth knew. They went on a date. They cruised around and then he dropped her back off at her house. So nothing really happened. But then Kenneth got this crazy look in his eye and told Roy Dale it's time to find another girl. They started cruising the small town of Everman, which is just south of Fort Worth. They stopped and got a 12-pack of beer. They were talking, driving around, and it was around 9:30 p.m. and he spotted what he was looking for. Kenneth saw a pretty teenage girl in a red and white striped blouse and cut-off jeans. She's a total stranger. She was just standing near a baseball field talking to two boys in a 1955 Ford. Purely by chance, Kenneth McDuff selected this girl. It was 16-year-old Edna Sullivan, her boyfriend, 17-year-old Robert Brand, and Robert's cousin, 15-year-old Mark Dunham. So I'm going to stop here and just talk about the three kids before we go on what else is going to happen. So Edna Louise Sullivan was a popular girl. She was about to begin her junior year at Everman High School. Her friends and family called her Louise. She loved basketball and she played on the team at her high school.
Aww.
She didn't do many other extracurricular activities because she was really focused on her schoolwork and making good grades. She was tiny. She was 5'2" and 110 pounds.
Oh, yeah. Tiny.
She attended the First Baptist Church in Everman, and she enjoyed volunteering in the church nursery to take care of the babies and toddlers during the sermons. Just 1 month before this, she had met and began dating Robert Brand, and he was from Alvarado, which was another small town. There's so many small towns outside of all these.
Sounds like it.
So Robert Brand was a handsome young boy. He was 16 years old. He loved music. He had been working several jobs to earn enough money to buy his own guitar, and he had just begun to play in a local band at teenage clubs and churches. Aww. His cousin, Mark Dunham, was visiting from California and was also really into music. He was a drummer. He had come to stay the summer with his cousin, who they were really more like brothers. Like they had grown up together. They were very close. They loved spending time outdoors. They would go hunting together and then also play music together. On this night, August 6th, the plan was that they were going to be going on a double date. Robert was meeting up with Louise, who was his new girlfriend of a month, and she was going to bring along her friend Rhonda to hang out with Marcus, so he would have a date. And then Rhonda and Louise were going to spend the night together. However, and this is really curious to me, or maybe Rhonda just felt something, but Rhonda had like this premonition that something was going to happen and she didn't want to go.
Oh.
And so she actually called them like right before and said, I don't feel good. She faked being sick. But without Rhonda, the three of them just decided they would hang out anyways. Robert and Marcus had already driven from Alvarado. So it's like, let's go anyways with just Louise.
But maybe if Rhonda went, 4 would have been too many.
I don't know.
No?
I think she would have just been killed.
He likes a challenge.
He's huge. He's 6'4".
That's true.
Because these boys are only 16 and 15. They're not very large boys either.
Yeah.
So the kids left Louise's house around 7 p.m. They were going to go see a movie. And then after a movie, like kids usually do, especially in small towns, they were just hanging out in the car. And so they had pulled up in the high school baseball field to just chill and talk. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they were smoking cigarettes.
Listen
maybe they were
music,
drinking.
whatever.
I don't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
At one point, one of the boys or Louise herself took out the mascara from her purse and wrote her name in the back of the car.
On the window or
it just
something?
says Louise, yeah.
Oh, okay.
In mascara. It was just something that they would find later. Unfortunately for them, they had no idea that fucking Kenneth McDuff was just strolling around.
Wow.
And he saw them. And he pulled up and he saw the car and he parked a little ways away. So they didn't really notice that he was there and he was just watching them.
My God.
Then he told Roy Dale to open the front seat console, which Roy Dale did. And McDuff pulled out a Colt special revolver that belonged to his brother Lonnie. And then he told Roy Dale to get something from the trunk of his car. What he had in the trunk of his car was a broken broomstick that he had just found on the side of the road and threw in there, probably because he's a sadistic motherfucker and he thought he would use it sometime. So it's just the broken end, one end of it was very jagged.
Oh, no.
And he told Roy Dale to follow him as they walked towards the parked car. He came up on the boys and Louise and he held up the gun and he told them to hand over their wallets. He took their wallets from them and then kind of mocked them and was like, this is all you got. I mean, they're 15 and 16-year-old kids.
Yeah.
So he just like took the money and was like, whatever. And then he told all three of them to get into the trunk of their own car, of the Ford, and he locked them into the trunk.
Oh, my God.
He told Roy Dale to go get back in his car and follow him. He was going to drive the Ford where the teenagers were locked in the back of the trunk, and Roy Dale would follow him. Now, this is the point where Roy Dale had the opportunity
to leave,
to do what was right.
Yeah, that's true.
He didn't. He just took on this passive role. Maybe he was afraid. I don't know what you do in this situation, but he got in the car and followed because he could have driven that car to the cops
exactly
right away. He did not. So
okay.
Kenneth McDuff drove the Ford with the teenagers in the trunk down a dark and narrow country road. Roydale was following him in Kenneth's Dodge. He still, for whatever reason, later when he's talking about this, he said he wasn't convinced that McDuff was actually going to hurt these people. So he's in like Delulu land here, thinking that, I don't know what
he
he's
was just
thinking.
going to scare them or something.
I don't
like
know. It's just a fun prank or something. I don't know what's going on in Roydale's mind. But McDuff turned into a field and stopped. At that point, he opened the trunk and he said, I want the young girl out. And he pulled her out by the arm and he told Roydale to take Louise and lock her in the trunk of his Dodge car. And Roydale did it. Roydale
he could have taken her away.
He could have driven. That's what I'm going to say every time. He could have gone and put her in the car and gotten the fuck out of there. But he didn't.
Yeah. It is hard to know. Like, if you think someone's not going to go that far, then maybe your brain is just like, okay, this is a joke. When's it going to end? Haha.
Yeah.
You know, like,
I guess.
How do you know? Like, if your brain is literally thinking, no one would actually do this.
I think that's it. He thought that Kenneth was just telling all these tall tales to sound cool.
He's a bully and he's doing a shitty thing, but he's not going to actually hurt them.
And Roydale looks up to Kenneth. He's 18 and he's like, oh my God, this 20-year-old wants to hang out with me. So there's like this God complex here. Oh, if I say no, then I'm going to look like a wuss and he's never going to want to hang out with me again. So I'm sure that's some of the conflict going on.
Yeah.
Doesn't excuse it, but... No. We just never know what we're going to do in these kinds of situations. And we'll talk about Roydale because he's definitely going to regret all of this.
Okay.
So after Roydale put Louise in the trunk and came back, Kenneth McDuff said, these guys got a good look at my face. It means I'm going to have to kill them. Roydale says he still didn't fully believe Kenneth was going to do anything. And then he saw Kenneth just walk right over to the trunk of the Ford and he aimed the gun right at the young boys. Robert and Marcus were in the back of the trunk on their knees at this point, and they started begging for their lives. They're like, we're not going to say anything. And McDuff, cold as fuck, just pulled the gun up and shot them both right in the face. He shot Robert twice and Marcus 3 times. Then he lifted Marcus up by the hair and shot him again.
The fuck?
Roydale was standing there and he just saw it happen. And he said when the guns went off, it shocked him and he covered his ears and he kind of went into like panic mode. And he said he had to look away. He couldn't watch it. But he said before he looked away, he looked at Kenneth's face and he said there was no emotion. He described it almost as if Kenneth looked peaceful as he was shooting these boys right in the face.
Oh my God. Those poor boys. Just a second ago, they're just sitting there having a good time. And for no fucking reason,
they're shot.
They're just shot dead.
And I have pictures and they look like young little boys. Like, it's so fucking sad. This is so fucking sad. When the firing stopped, this was the one time Roydale kind of, I guess, tried to do something. And he said, good God, Kenneth, like, why did you do that? And then Kenneth just said, I had to. He seemed calm and collected, as if what he did was just what needed to be done. Nothing wrong with it. Roydale said the only time he seemed upset was when he asked Roydale to come over to put the boys' bodies back into the trunk, but they wouldn't fit properly and they couldn't get the trunk to close. And he said that's when McDuff lost his cool because he was pissed that he couldn't get the trunk closed. More emotion about the trunk not closing than killing the children.
Oh my gosh.
They couldn't get the trunk to close, so McDuff got in the Ford and he just backed it up with the trunk still wide open against a fence to kind of hide that there were bodies in there. And then he was like, okay, that's good enough. Let's move on, because he wanted to go for Louise. They left this Ford parked in a field, backed up to a fence with the trunk popped open, and then the 2 dead boys in the back. And then McDuff told Roydale to get in the passenger seat, and they drove away in the Dodge with Louise in the trunk. She doesn't know.
Scared.
I'm sure she heard the gunshots. Yeah. They drove about 11 miles, and he pulled over again into a field. Kenneth took Louise out of the trunk, and he made her undress, and then he threw her in the back seat, and he began raping her. Roydale sat on the back of the car, kind of watching and not knowing what he should do. After Kenneth was done hurting Louise, he asked Roydale if he wanted a turn, to which he claims he said no. I don't want to do this. But then he realized that Kenneth had a gun. He was out in the middle of nowhere and he felt like he should comply. So he said he did get into the back seat with Louise. He said it took him a minute. He couldn't get excited enough, but he was eventually able to rape her as well. Okay. He did admit to that.
And he obviously can just kill you if he wants to. So it's kind of hard.
He saw him just brutally shoot 2 boys in the face.
Yeah. Not
with
just
no
once.
emotion.
Yep.
And this guy's now telling you to do this. You're like, I got to do whatever he tells me.
Yeah.
And that's where Roy Dale was. He said after he was done with Louise, Kenneth decided to have his way with Louise yet again. But this time...
I want to hear it.
So he used the broken broomstick and Louise was screaming. And Roy Dale says he remembers her screaming and saying, please stop, please stop. I think you ripped something.
Oh, no. Oh, my God.
The problem is hearing stuff like that only fed Kenneth's... depravity.
Okay, of course.
He enjoyed instilling pain.
I don't know what is wrong with me if it is being hungover with you right now, but I just started crying and I don't usually cry
sad.
Like during our stuff. That poor girl.
This one is so hard. These are his first 3 murders. And remember, I told you he's going to get out.
I know. This is fucking
These
insane.
Are horrific, fucking horrific murders. And they're going to let this man out.
Oh my God.
And nobody knows about him.
Yeah, I've never heard of him.
So finally, Kenneth thought he was done and he told Louise she could put her clothes back on and they started driving again. She's in the back seat.
Bleeding, probably.
Terrified, bleeding, horrible things. He stopped and he told Louise to get out of the car and sit down on the road in front of the car.
Oh my God.
Roy Dale is still here. He didn't know what McDuff was going to do. And then he told Roy Dale to give him the broomstick again. And then he saw Kenneth go over and he forced Louise's head down to the ground and began choking her with the broomstick. He said she began waving her arms and kicking her legs. And at that time, Kenneth told Roy Dale to come hold her legs down, which Roy Dale did. He went and he held Louise's legs down while Kenneth McDuff crushed her to death with the broomstick. Then he callously picked up her body and threw her over the fence and told Roy Dale to get back in the car, and they drove away. Along the way, they stopped at a convenience store where Kenneth said they had to get rid of the evidence. He told Roy Dale, you better keep your mouth shut. If the police beat you, it's better than what will happen if you tell them what we did. They'll put you in the electric chair.
That's probably why he had Roy rape her too.
Yes, because then he's part of it, right?
Right.
They stopped somewhere along the way to bury the boys' wallets, and then they discarded their underwear and clothing that had any kind of blood on it. They then drove to Roy Dale's house, and Kenneth's like, I'm going to stay the night with you. And he said they slept together in the bed. And he said the next morning, Kenneth grabbed some rags from his house. He wrapped the gun that was used and dug a 2-foot deep hole near his garage to bury and hide the gun. He then said, let's go to a car wash. Roy Dale went with him and they cleaned the inside and outside of the car out. While cleaning, Kenneth found a long brown hair that belonged to Louise, and he showed it to Roy Dale, and he said, something like this could get us put in the electric chair, so make sure you clean it as good as possible. This was a very reckless killing, if you think about it.
Yeah.
He left
just
that car.
randomly decided to.
So the car was found the next morning.
Yeah.
So it's Sunday, August 7th. A local man's just driving to a fishing spot on this road, and he sees a Ford parked by a fence with the trunk popped open. And this poor man, I feel bad for him because he just gets out thinking, what's going on? Is somebody having car trouble? And he finds this grisly scene of these 2 young boys in the back of the trunk. Louise's parents didn't even know to be worried yet at this point. They didn't know that Rhonda had called out, and they thought Louise was spending the night with Rhonda.
Oh, man.
It's like 10 a.m. the next morning. Nobody's thinking anything.
Yeah, they're just waking up.
But then she gets the call that Robert and Marcus were found. And then she calls Rhonda's house, and Louise isn't there. Mother's worst nightmare. She immediately realizes something's happened to her daughter, but they don't have any
she's not
evidence
with them,
of her.
though.
So immediately in the area, they had 250 volunteers trying to help find her, like right away. They had helicopters, they had the dogs, like it was a big search. Later that afternoon, Roy Dale had finally gotten away from Kenneth. They had cleaned the car, and then Kenneth finally was like going to hang out with his brother Lonnie, and Roy Dale was decompressing from what had happened.
Yeah.
And he was in a car ride with a couple of friends, and the news came on that these 2 boys had been found murdered right outside of Fort Worth. And he just started crying and just like completely broke down and told his friends, I was
happened?
with Kenneth McDuff. And his friend said, we're going to drive you to the police station right now. And he went in and he confessed everything.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He was arrested. And then he told the officers that Kenneth had done it and he had buried the gun in his garage. He was also brought to the Everman Police Department to help locate Louise's body. And he was able to help point them in the direction of where he thought they went. And they were able to recover Louise's body. She was found laying face down in the grass where they had left her the night before. So now the police want to go and get Kenneth McDuff. Roy Dale knew that Kenneth had a plan to go on a date that night with a girl named Joanne. By the time all of this had happened, they had found Louise's body like right around like 8 p.m.
Okay.
So it's all kind of happening really fast. And then they're like, we need to go get Kenneth McDuff. And he said he's out on a date. He'll be coming back to drop Joanne off. So they actually did
Staked
like
out.
a little stakeout in her bushes. Like the cops were hiding in her bushes. And so Kenneth is pulling up to drop off his girlfriend. When the lights come on, he sees them.
Oh, man.
And he fucking guns it.
Oh, my God.
Backwards.
Dang
Like
it.
the cops ended up shooting at him. It was like a full on shootout.
Wow. The girl's still in the car?
She was.
Oh, no.
I was reading about it. She like shot down to the floorboards. Thank God. It was kind of reckless, honestly, of the police to be shooting at her, but they did recover him. And these were cops that knew Kenneth McDuff already. They knew he was bad news.
Yeah.
So they were probably ready to just like get him.
Yeah, especially after doing this.
Yeah.
Because they probably all knew it was going to lead to something like this.
Oh, they all knew.
Yeah.
And I feel like Louise was not his first one.
No, that was
just
all of this was just way too callous.
He was killing very easily at this point. So how many had he already done?
His first one, there should have been some hesitation because it's the first, right?
Yeah.
Even when you don't have feelings, there's still a hesitation because it's something new.
Yeah. And he's 20 now. And remember, he told his brother at 16 that he had raped and killed a girl.
I believe it.
So they brought in Joanne because she was with Kenneth, and she testified that she had seen Lonnie and Kenneth earlier in the day with something that they took out behind her barn. I forgot to mention when they went back to Roy Dale's garage and dug up that hole, there was no gun there.
Oh, he came back and got it?
Because it was Lonnie's gun. And then they were at Joanne's house behind the barn. So she's like, they were probably burying the gun. But they went there and they weren't able to find the gun again. So they were never able to find the murder weapon.
Interesting.
They also never found the broomstick. So I don't know where he put that. But they did book Lonnie, his brother, for destruction of evidence. And he was put into jail with a $10,000 bail. I think because they realized Lonnie was a bad seed too.
Yeah.
What kind of brother's like hiding?
Yeah, I'll help you.
Yeah, he's fucked up too. So
it's hard to know what you'd do for a sibling, but he already knew his brother was not good. Do we have anything on his brother later in life, or we don't know?
We'll talk about Lonnie some more here in a minute. So the trial began in November of 1966. It was known in the area as the Broomstick Murders. You will hear Kenneth McDuff referred to sometimes as the Broomstick Killer. Here comes Mama Addie McDuff. She said her boy would never do something like that. Along with her 3 daughters, they all testified that he had been with them. Addie said the reason that he lied about where he was is because he had been out with a church girl and he didn't want to tarnish her reputation. His mama said this on the stand.
Okay.
But they had Roy Dale, and Roy Dale was ready to sing. He was so tortured.
What purpose would he have to come forward and say, I also raped her. I had to watch this go down. I helped.
So Addie McDuff did hire a lawyer. She had money, remember? They had made some money now, and Addie will do this until the day Kenneth dies. So she hired a lawyer, and their defense was that it wasn't Kenneth that killed these 3 children. It was Roy Dale. It was Roy Dale's idea, and Kenneth was just...
Yeah, the big bad boy was just going along with the little kid.
Exactly.
That kid is so bad. Such a bad influence.
But that didn't hold weight because Roy Dale took the stand, and he was on the stand for 5 hours.
And it was probably emotional.
I was just about to say that. It was apparent to everyone that he was distraught. Yeah. And not only that, he was scared out of his mind anytime he looked at Kenneth.
He's probably still even wondering if he did something right. If he didn't confess to his friends who had good consciences, like he might have not told anybody.
Yeah.
It might have gone deeper. Like if he didn't have that emotional response while being around other people.
Yeah.
He's probably still in shock that any of this is happening to him at all.
But he just broke down on the stand. They said he was shaking the whole time and just was very genuine.
I do feel bad for him.
Yeah, it was a complete opposite. When Kenneth took the stand, he was cool as could be.
He probably couldn't tear up if he wanted to.
I don't think he can. I honestly don't. He claimed that Roy Dale was an angry, frustrated guy that couldn't get a girl. And out of the kindness of his heart, he let Roy Dale borrow his car that night to try and score with the ladies.
Okay. Because that's exactly why we choose boys.
He claimed that while Roy Dale was out murdering the two boys and Louise, he was sleeping in a field near an abandoned shopping center. And then Roy Dale just showed back up with his Dodge and they went home. He had no idea any of this happened.
Oh, and by the way, what my mom and sisters told you was a lie because I was alone in a field.
And that was brought up too. Like all of them, they were just all lying. But this is a family that has always covered for him.
Right.
And a lot of people who talk about Kenneth McDuff say everything that came out of his mouth, he believed because he said it, it must be true. That's just the kind of mind he had. He was taught that from a young age.
Yeah.
It was very clear to the jury who was the main culprit. And on November 15th, 1966, they delivered their verdict on Kenneth McDuff, finding him guilty on all 3 counts of murders and sentencing him to the death penalty. Rosebud residents and everyone in the nearby vicinity felt a wave of relief that this dangerous man who they knew was a threat to society would finally be off the streets
and out of their town
and hopefully hitting the electric chair.
Yeah.
Roy Dale was sentenced to 25 years for his part in the murders.
Yeah.
He had to be. I do feel bad for Roy Dale. I do.
Yeah.
But we talked about he had those opportunities.
He did.
I don't know.
And he was young. I don't know. It is a hard one. Because he did have the opportunity to save her life at least after.
He could have.
Yeah.
He saw him kill those boys and he had the chance to get the fuck out.
He could have tried to run. He probably would have been shot at, but tried to run and get in the car and leave with her.
The truth is he probably would have been killed if he had.
It's true though. We could run in circles talking about what could have been, what he should have done.
Kenneth McDuff is just a bad guy. You don't want to be around him in any way. You definitely don't want to just even be his friend. So while in prison, Roy Dale was despised by other prisoners because he was seen as a snitch.
Yeah.
And he was mercilessly tormented.
Oh.
He became very paranoid. He felt like he would be murdered by the other inmates. He began seeing visions at night and hearing voices. In 1976, they moved him from prison to a mental hospital to serve out the rest of his sentence.
Yeah.
He did finally get paroled in 1979, so he only spent a total of 13 years of the 25 he was sentenced. But Roy Dale is a complete wreck.
He was never the same.
Yeah. This destroyed him in every way. I was reading that he did move back to the town that he was from, and he was just a shell of a human being for the rest of his life, which is sad. He was only 18, and he just thought he was going out with a cool older dude.
It's fucked up.
So Kenneth McDuff is locked away. He's on death row.
Where he should have stayed, but we know he doesn't.
No. 2 times in 1969, it came within a couple of days when his execution was supposed to happen, and both times he was granted stays, which those go all the way up to the Supreme Court, I found out when researching this. And then again in April 1970, he was scheduled to be executed and he received a stay.
But why?
Well,
because we've covered a lot of people who don't get that. Why him?
It's what was going on in the U.S. at the time.
Okay.
So only a handful of executions had taken place in the United States in the 2 years before he was convicted, and none happened on the time he was on death row. So we must have been going through something at the time where people were against the death penalty.
Yeah.
There was a case that came up. It was Furman versus Georgia. And in 1972, the Supreme Court handed down a landmark decision ruling that the unlimited discretion given to juries to assign death sentences was considered cruel and unusual punishment and was therefore unconstitutional. So in effect, this decision in 1972 meant all capital convictions in the country were overturned.
Okay.
So within a few months, the death sentences of 88 inmates on death row in Texas were changed from death to life in prison. So there wasn't designation on if life in prison without parole. Okay. It was just, you're on death row, now you have life in prison. So that opened one little window.
Right.
The whole time that he was imprisoned, he was put into the area with inmates that were considered to be extremely dangerous and a high escape risk. He was known to be a trouble prisoner. The guards would say that. He also, because he was like the big guy or whatever, he was able to kind of form weaker men underneath him. So he was once again just continuing to be the bully that found weaker accomplices.
Yeah.
So after he was commuted from death row to life, here comes Mama, Addie McDuff, and she hired a new lawyer. He was from Dallas, Gary Jackson, and he began a long and costly effort to prove that McDuff had been framed and that the true killer was his evil running mate, Roy Dale Green. He bought into this somehow with Addie. I think she was very convincing. And it's really strange because this wasn't just him helping a client out. He actually incorporated a thing called Justice for McDuff Incorporated. And he said that they were going to make movies and book deals. What, people do for people who are truly on death row who shouldn't be was being done for fucking Kenneth McDuff.
Whoa.
Just a weird little kind of side.
I wonder how
thing.
that guy feels.
Yeah.
Later.
Him getting involved and maybe getting a lot of money from Addie McDuff, maybe that's part of it. He wrote a letter to the chairman of the Board of Pardons and Paroles in 1979 and considered what he thought was dramatic new evidence that Kenneth McDuff was innocent.
Dramatic, huh?
So this new evidence, he said, was going to clear McDuff's name was just a kind of spin on the story I already told. He said that he had evidence that on the night of the killings, McDuff had handed his keys over to Roy Dale so Roy Dale could go on a date.
Oh, jeez. Well, he did give him the keys to his car.
But now he said Roy Dale didn't actually go on a date. Instead, he used the Dodge Charger to go commit a robbery.
Okay.
So it's just kind of a twist on it. In this one, again, he said that Kenneth McDuff was dropped off in a shopping center in Everman and was just taking a nap the whole time. Then something went wrong with what he thought was just a burglary, and he ended up killing these 3 kids.
Yeah, because they're in the middle of a parking lot, and that's where a burglary is happening.
Yeah.
Or just stealing something from someone.
Yes.
I guess my brain went to a business or something like that.
Right. So he makes up this whole scenario. I'm not even going to read through it because it's ridiculous. So where Kenneth McDuff had gotten the death penalty conviction was in one county where Louise's body was found. The 2 boys' bodies were found in a different county. So it was kind of on this county line.
Okay.
And Johnson County was the one where the boys were found, and the conviction came from the county where Louise's body was found. So this lawyer was playing games, and he basically gave this new scenario to say that Louise was killed in Johnson County with the boys, because he said that Roy Dale killed all 3 of them at the same time instead of how it actually happened where he drove. And what this would allow is that then they could overturn the conviction in this other county because they could say that county didn't have jurisdiction to give the conviction for Louise's murder. And then they would have to reopen the case. So this is just legal mumbo jumbo that lawyers know how to do. And that's what kind of, once again, widened that gap just a little bit because it put some doubt in the parolees' minds.
So it's not where the body's found?
It's where the crime happened, the murder.
Okay.
That's the best I can explain it without going into a ton of detail that y'all don't want to hear because we have plenty of other things to talk about. But yes, so his letter somehow got 1 member of the parole board to vote to let McDuff out.
What?
But it didn't result in parole because the way that it works to get parole is every person on the board has to vote yes. But what happens is once one person falls, then when it goes to the next parole board hearing, they see that one person is already like waffling and it just starts kind of domino affecting, which is what's going to fucking happen
until
for Kenneth
there's
McDuff.
One left that's getting bullied.
Yeah.
It's still crazy. Like, I don't understand stuff like this.
No, this is why it really makes me mad. I looked into too much about parole boards and how they're even nominated and, they get to be anonymous. So we don't know who lets people back out on the streets. So this new lawyer also told Kenneth McDuff, hey, we got 1 vote. Now it's time to make sure you're looking like you're trying to reform. And Kenneth McDuff started doing things like enrolling in courses to finish his high school degree.
Okay.
He also enrolled for college classes and was trying to clean up his, I guess, reputation.
Okay.
But he was still doing all kinds of shit in prison. Like, he got in with the worst of the worst, and he found ways to even get drugs and it said he was able to get sex somehow. Like he was bribing and paying off. I don't know if he was getting the money from Addie. A lot of people think Addie was an enabler. Well, we know she's an enabler, but even in prison,
right?
Because he was able to pay off guards to go like have sex with women and get drugs. And there's like a whole underbelly going on in the prison systems. We know this today. And Kenneth knew how to like plug into that. So back to the parole board, and the way that it works is they're looking for inmates that are showing that they can be reformed. And so Kenneth started doing those things to look a little bit better, at least for the parole board. And I was looking at the way that they're brought into the parole board. They don't talk to each other. So every person reviews the cases. They don't meet the actual prisoners many times. They just read the cases. And
so
they read letters.
Not like it is in the movies where they sit there.
At least not back then. This is the 80s at this time. So he's been in prison now for about 13 years, and it's coming up to these parole boards, and we're in 1980, and they're all reading it. And there was one member, her name was Helen Kopitka, and she saw that same information that Gary Jackson had sent to the parole board a few years ago, and it swayed her. And she voted to give him parole. So he's got 2 of the 7 votes that he needed. He started getting cocky. This is when he makes a really dumb move, and he talks to one of the board members and basically bribes him and says, I can guarantee you that you're going to get $10,000. That's just going to show up in the glove compartment of your car if you vote to let me out.
Oh, geez.
That parole board member did report him, and he actually got a 3rd conviction while already in jail for bribery.
Wow. Good job.
So he should have been pushed out to 1992, but then something else is going to happen. First of all, he lucked out because of the Supreme Court decision, but now we were running into an issue in Texas because they had too many prisoners in the system. It was overcrowded.
Oh, I hate when they do that.
And they needed to parole inmates.
That's when you let out people who smoke weed, right. Or, had an accounting
dangerous offenders,
fraud or something.
They needed to parole 750 inmates a week.
750?
This is Texas. They love to put people in jail, apparently. I don't know exactly, but it was basically thrown to the parole boards like, we got to let some people out, so start looking at this. And they said there were only 15 members of the parole board. This is 1989. And they had over 1,000 inmates coming to them every week to look through. And they had to let 750 of them off.
That's insane.
That's scary, is what that is.
That's really scary.
By this time, Kenneth McDuff had been in the system for a long time. He had come up for parole at least, I think it was 6 or 7 times. And so people just had seen his name over and over. And they were going through 1,000 per week. And because of this, they couldn't really get into the details of what was going on. They would see just kind of like a summary page of the inmate. And what they would see is that he was, taking college classes and cleaning up. And he had like been a model prisoner, and they saw that he had been there so long. They weren't really seeing all of the horrific crimes that he did as the broomstick murderer, which is also scary. And by the time McDuff came up in 1989, they were approving 8 of every 10 parole applications that came across their desk. And they were still falling behind because they had a system capacity at the time in Texas of 60,000 inmates, and they were getting so many more than that. The year that Kenneth McDuff went free, they let out 36,000 parolees.
That is crazy.
And little me, I'm 12 years old, just living in Central Texas. Yeah. And this shit's like 36,000 potentially dangerous people were just let out of the systems because they just don't have room for them.
And not even that. They're arresting people for everything.
Yeah.
That's their problem.
That was the problem.
Like, calm down. They're just arrest happy.
Yeah.
In Texas.
But he slipped through the cracks.
Man.
He was released. They were able to visit with one man named Chris Mealy, and he was a parole board member who actually voted to free McDuff. And they were like, how did you let this happen? Like, why didn't you look at it more closely? And he said what he saw, he was impressed by 2 things. He said, first, McDuff had begun to improve himself by taking college credit courses. And second, the file showed that in 6 of the 15 years since he had become eligible for parole, McDuff had received 1 affirmative vote. So just the fact that his lawyer was able to get one parole board member to believe that fucked up story, that's what eventually got him off. It got to the point where everything was overcrowded and they just had to let people off. And they're like, oh, well, he kept getting this one person.
Yeah.
He said if any of us knew who he truly was,
obviously,
we would have never done that. Basically, he says he wishes every day that he could take it back.
Yeah.
But that's what happened. In October of 1989, Kenneth McDuff is back on the street. It's 21 years after he was put away for the brutal, brutal murders of Louise, Robert, and Marcus.
And I did see pictures, and they're all adorable babies.
Good little kids. Just so fucking senseless.
Yep.
He didn't even know them.
No point whatsoever.
As soon as he was back on the streets, all of the sheriffs from Falls County, Bell County, the ones that had dealt with him for years, they couldn't believe it. They're like, how the fuck is this guy back out on the street? Have they gone crazy? How did the parole board let him out? And they knew
he was going to do something again.
Yep, exactly. Larry Pamplin was the main sheriff. He was the one that had the shootout with him when he pulled up with Joanne and everything. And he said the most frustrating part was that they knew this man was going to kill someone else. Yeah. But they didn't know when or where, and if it didn't happen in their jurisdiction. But they all kind of like put an alert on, and they called other people in different areas. And Larry Pamplin also called the Texas Rangers. And there were two brothers. I'm just setting this because they'll come back into it later. And they were the McNamara's. And he told them, McDuff's back out on the street. We just got to keep an eye. We got to catch this guy for any and everything because he is going to kill someone.
Yeah, that's good.
But even with that, he's going to get away with stuff because he's going to bounce jurisdictions all the time. That's what these guys do. Yep. He knows how to play the system. Mm-hmm. Kenneth McDuff may have only had an IQ of 92, but he knew how to criminally bounce around, do things, get people. He must have had like a higher, I guess, street smarts. Maybe that's what it is that he had. And he used it to his advantage. Now, something else I want to mention, because you asked about Lonnie earlier, and I'm just going to put this as a side note. I didn't really know where to put this, but while he was locked away in prison, his brother and only friend in the world, Lonnie, was actually killed in 1986.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Lonnie never became a bad guy as far as like assaulting or hurting people. He was a criminal in a lot of other ways. Like he would commit fraud. He was stealing money from different businesses, burglaries. So he was in and out of trouble, but he continued to work for their dad, J.A., at the concrete business. And he was able to kind of do a side biz of his own. And he had a couple workers underneath him. He was actually killed by one of those workers. His name was Larry. It's this weird story. He was out with his girlfriend and another coworker that night, and she was friends with Larry's estranged wife, Doris, and she's like, let's just stop by Doris's house. And so the four of them were there, and his girlfriend and the other coworker ran off maybe to go get some beer or something. And while they were gone, Larry showed up at his estranged wife. He was drunk. He opened the door and he sees Lonnie and assumes Lonnie's fucking his wife.
Yeah.
Asked no questions because he's probably drunk, and he shot and killed Lonnie.
Oh, wow.
It's just kind of this weird kind of circumstance. Mm-hmm. I bring it up only because Lonnie was the only person that Kenneth cared for. And he said this in prison later. Lonnie was his only friend in life and the only person that he would take any advice from, listen to. And so he's back out on the streets now. Lonnie's dead. He has no one as any sort of moral compass. Not that Lonnie probably was. Maybe Lonnie would have been a moral compass.
He might have been.
Because he had grown up at this point.
He could have been like, don't do that.
Right.
And he probably would have
listened.
Done it. Yeah.
And he also has this kind of rage about it because he's lost his only friend in life. The first thing he did when he came out is he's like, I'm going to fucking kill Larry. That was top of his list.
Oh, okay.
From what I read, Larry just skipped town. He never killed Larry, but I think Larry probably knew that he was top of the list, so he changed his name. I don't know.
Larry obviously wasn't in jail for what he did?
No, he didn't go to jail. I think it was considered like a
because he was
misunderstanding or self-defense. What? I don't know exactly. Kind of a sad story for Lonnie. Yeah. Back to Kenneth. He's out on the streets of Rosebud, and they were scared. Everyone who lived there started locking their doors again.
Fucking boogeyman.
Yeah.
How scary to be in that town.
And Addie and J.A. were still connected with Rosebud, but they had at this time moved and built a house in Belton, Texas.
Oh, okay.
It was on Highway 317. Anyone who knows Belton, Texas, my house wasn't that far from there. Yeah. And Kenneth, coming out on parole, had to put an address down, and he put J.A. and Addie and said, I'm going to be living in Belton, Texas. McDuff right away started violating his parole. He moved frequently. He was all over the place. He listed Belton, Texas as his address, but then he would go stay with his sisters because they all still, for whatever reason, kept him around. And not only that, they were like enabling him. His sister was giving him a car that she had. Addie went and bought him a brand new truck. I don't understand these women and why they're so obsessed with this man and taking care of him. And now they're probably even more doting towards him because Lonnie's dead. So he was kind of going all over doing whatever he wanted. He had no apparent means of support. He never got a job, but he always had money. So a lot of people think Addie was giving him money. He always had a nice car, and he just went straight into living a criminal life. He was known to really be into crack cocaine, and he would go get high all the time. He was always looking for accomplices again to just run around with him. He visited sex workers often, and he would rob crack dealers. Like, he would go to buy drugs and then he would take their money. Like, he was very brazen.
Yeah.
This whole invulnerability coming out of prison, he had escaped death row.
Yeah.
He's now 43 years old.
Wow.
As soon as he gets out, he is not trying to be a better person. All of that bullshit about taking college classes and like being a good person, it was all a front to get out.
He doesn't know how to be a normal person at all, it sounds like.
And he's now been in prison for 21 years, which does things to people.
Yeah.
And he's already a cold-blooded, just killer kind of guy.
The world is his playground.
Exactly. Law enforcement believes he started killing right away. And we'll talk about it here in a minute, because one of the first victims that I will bring up was killed within 3 days of him leaving prison.
Wow. It was probably an itch he really needed to scratch for a really long time. It doesn't surprise me that, that it happened right away.
No. In the spring of 1991, McDuff enrolled in Texas State Technical College in Waco, and he moved into a dormitory on campus.
You can move into a dorm that old?
TSTC was a place where usually students between the ages of 17 to 24 would go. It was like a trade skill school. So you would learn how to like do mechanics or HVAC or machine operation. And it was one of those for-profit schools, kind of like ITT Tech and things that we know now.
Right. It's not a legit
It's not a real. Yeah, they're just making money. It's a moneymaker.
Right.
Somehow TSTC had gotten connected in with the state of Texas, and they were giving grants and paying tuition and helping reform ex-cons.
Gotcha.
So it was a great opportunity for him to find basically a free place to live.
Yeah.
As long as he enrolled in college, and he got like his tuition paid for, free room and board.
Wow.
And he was living in the dorm with a lot of these kids that were aged 17 to 24. And then alongside that, they have ex-cons, and fucking Kenneth McDuff, who at this point in 1991 is 45 years old, living in a dorm.
Yeah.
He loved this. He got to be a big man on campus again. It's what he did in prison. And now he had all these young kids looking up to him, and he would regale them with all these stories about being in prison. He did not tell anyone what he had been in prison for. And remember, this is 1991 when you couldn't just go online and look up his name and find out that he had killed these 3 kids.
Right.
He told people that he had burglarized things. He did tell people he had killed people, but not...
They were probably like, Roy, yeah, okay, buddy, or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They all called him Big Mac. Behind his back, they called him Crack Mac because they all knew that he had a thing for crack cocaine. He was always asking guys where to get the stuff and asking them to go out on crazy rides with him to drink. And he had money all the time. So a lot of these young kids would go out with him because he would buy them crack cocaine or liquor or whatever. They also knew that he was fond of prostitutes, and they often saw sex workers showing up at his dorm room.
Wow. Great role model.
When he would show up high on cocaine, he would be loud and chaotic, even more than his usual self. And a lot of people realized that something wasn't right with him, and they all kind of became afraid of him. So at first, he had all these guys kind of looking up to him, but within a couple of months, they were like, something's off about this guy. And he didn't really have any friends. And he admits that later when he's in prison again. Nobody really liked him, and the world hated him, and everybody was against him. And if only he had friends, blah, blah, blah. Poor me.
Well, you're unhinged.
Yeah.
You're scary.
That's an understatement. He was also a known resident of the subculture area known as The Cut in Waco. So this is where the drug dealers and women of the streets resided. Many of the women who worked the streets were afraid of him. They knew he had a fondness for sadism towards those that he hired.
That's so scary.
A couple of sex workers spoke out after he was arrested, and they felt safe enough to talk about it. And they spoke of dates with him. One of them said that she met up with Kenneth, and he forced her to have every kind of sex imaginable for 3 hours straight. He called it going around the world. And she knew that he did this with many other women.
Yeah.
One of the other women who had encountered Kenneth McDuff a few times and had friends who did, she indicated that he had very weird things. She said he would never completely get undressed to have sex, and he would often leave his boots on while performing the act. She said there was very little touching and there was complete absence of anything you would relate to tenderness in any way. She said he enjoyed inflicting pain and cared not at all for if the sex partner was enjoying herself. In fact, she said having sex with Kenneth, you wanted to act like you didn't enjoy it because acting like you liked it in any way would set him off.
Oh.
She said he was a predator.
Through and through.
Through and through. And she said she didn't even think Kenneth liked sex at all. She thought he would even fake orgasms and maybe wasn't able to even get off unless he was inflicting pain.
Yeah.
And she said the only reason he hired sex workers, you know, most men are looking for actual sex. She said no, he just wanted someone to dominate and inflict pain upon, and sex workers were an easy target for that.
Right.
When we get into more of the victim side of it, like I said, a lot of them will be sex workers. And it does make me wonder if there were more that he was doing this to and that he killed. And we don't know.
I think so. I think when it comes to serial killers, how can you ever find exactly everything that they've done?
And they're not going to admit to it.
Right.
We know that as soon as he moved into the dorms of TSTC and in the months that followed, there were several Waco area prostitutes that were reported missing. But this didn't really bother Waco police, although they knew Kenneth McDuff was living in the dorms there. They also just didn't care that much about sex workers.
Yeah.
In interviews, I probably have this written down later because I always get ahead of myself. They basically were like, that's just what they do. Like they're in a high risk job and that can happen to any of them at any time. And we couldn't trace it back and say it was Kenneth McDuff for sure.
You could have tried.
They didn't try.
You might have actually found out right away.
And put his ass back in jail.
Oh, yeah. Candy, she went with him that night and we haven't seen her since.
Exactly.
It was actually pretty easy.
But they didn't try. Oh, and I didn't mention that this campus of TSTC, it was kind of tucked away outside of Waco. It was on an old Air Force base and it was surrounded by woods on 3 sides.
Oh, great.
Perfect.
Yep.
One woman named Linda recalled riding around with Kenneth in his car alongside her husband, and she opened the glove compartment to find a woman's wallet with an ID included, and it was a young blonde girl. And she asked Kenneth, she said, "Who did this belong to?" And he said, "Oh, it's just some girl. I went on a date with her, but she was a total bitch.
So I kept her wallet." Yeah,
it makes you wonder, who is that girl? Did they look her up? I couldn't find anything else about that, but when I read that, I was like, what? No woman just leaves her wallet and doesn't come back.
No.
Because she's probably dead.
She's either dead or she was, he took it from her and he's like, we're going to put this in here for right now. And she ran or something.
Yeah.
But she's probably dead.
So Kenneth is out on the streets roaming again. He wasn't going to be caught for many years. We don't know how many women he raped, robbed, killed. He always had his home base to go back to in Belton, where his mom and dad lived, and Addie continued to supply him with whatever he needed. He was wrecking cars left and right. He was a very bad driver. He was in a different car all the time.
Wow.
He'd show back up and the car would be fucked up and they would just give him a new one.
I don't understand.
He's also cheating the system. He's taking financial aid to go to college, even though he rarely showed up for classes. Linda, the girl I just mentioned, said he would show up at their house at noon every day with a pack of beer and they would just get wasted all day. He wasn't going to classes, but somehow he will manage to pass and get a certification in machine shop operations. But this also goes back to the fact that TSTC is not a real college.
Right.
They don't care if you show up or not as long as they're getting money. Mm-hmm. So everyone passes. He also filed for food stamps and was given money from the government. That just made me mad. I had to throw that in there. I hear it's hard to get food stamps. How did fucking Kenneth McDuff get food stamps?
Well,
he would take jobs here and there, but he never stayed at a job more than about 2 weeks. He just
of course not.
Couldn't because he wanted to go get high all the time. But I am bringing this up because one of the jobs was at a gas station, a convenience store called the Quick Pack. He lied on his application about his felony record. And I guess at convenience stores, they're always looking for employees and they don't really do a background check.
Yeah, that is the scary thing because if you're not going to do a background check, how many people can lie?
He was given the keys to the safe because he was going to be working overnight.
Oh, yeah.
And he was told how to prevent burglaries, which that's a dangerous thing to tell Kenneth.
He's like, oh, thanks for the advice and thank you for the money. Goodbye.
Exactly what he did. He didn't steal anything while he worked there, but he told all of his friends he knew how to rob the Quick Packs. And this was in the 1990s, there were several Quick Packs in the Waco, Temple, Killeen area. So he had a way to make money now. The other thing I want to mention when he worked at the Quick Pack is that this is where he met a man who was his trainer for the 3 weeks that he worked there. And that trainer had a wife.
Oh.
And she's going to come back up as a victim later on. So at this point, I think the best way to discuss Kenneth's drug-crazed and sadistic run of murders is to just go through the victims one by one, kind of like what we've done with other serial killers, because I don't really know how else to tell this story.
Right.
And I want to make sure we talk about the victims.
Yes.
Preface it with, these are the women we know he killed and he would eventually admit to in prison.
Okay.
Who knows how many others are out there? One more thing I want to mention about Kenneth and his character. He was a racist, deeply so. He had it out for black men, specifically. He used every derogatory term possible. But for whatever reason, he really enjoyed visiting black female sex workers.
It was probably another power thing.
Maybe.
He hated the black men, so he would go to black women and be like, haha, I have your women.
Probably. And that is, you know, if you want to psychoanalyze it, they believe it was his deep-seated racism that drew him to the black women. He wanted to dominate, humiliate, and hurt them.
Well, yes, and he hurts. Yeah.
I'm bringing this up because 2 of his victims will be black female sex workers. And I found it very sad because these are the women that are the least talked about. Many times,
of course,
they're not even in some of the articles.
Fucked up.
They talk about the little white girls, but they don't talk about these 2 women that we know. And I think he probably killed even more black female sex workers.
Because we're not going to hear about it.
No. The other thing that happened right after he was paroled, it was a few months after, he got into a skirmish in Temple, Texas with some black boys because they said something to him, and his racism, he couldn't handle a black man coming at him, and he pulled a gun. They got into a big fight, and he was convicted of aggravated assault with a weapon, full violation of his parole, and he should have gone back to prison right then and there. But because it was overcrowded still in Texas prisons, he didn't get anything. I think it's also, Texas is a very racist area, especially here. I think it was because it was against black men. They let him go. This could have stopped all of these women that I'm about to mention from being killed if he had just gone back in for violating his parole here, because it was very clear that he was still a danger to society just by this one skirmish with these guys.
That's true.
When I was reading this book, it listed everything that you're not supposed to do when you're on parole. And it's a list of like 20 things.
And
Kenneth McDuff
everything.
did every single one of them.
Wow.
And they knew he did it.
Oh.
And his parole officers, they're just like, we're too busy, or we can't put him in prison anyway. It's overcrowded. And so he really could just do whatever the fuck he wanted. And
that's crazy.
Knew it.
Yeah. And he knew it. That's what is more dangerous.
1990s were a crazy time in apparently my hometown.
I guess so. What were we saying last night? The 90s were the best. The last good decade. Not for this stuff.
No. So we'll start with Seraphia Parker. Seraphia Parker, just 3 days after Kenneth McDuff left prison on October 14th, 1989, her body was found in Temple, Texas. She was 29 years old. She was found in a field, strangled to death, and naked. Not much is known about her. Still isn't known today. Not much was done at the time her body was found to track down her killer because she was just seen as part of that high-risk job, and that just goes with the territory.
That's so stupid.
It makes me so
understand it's high risk,
angry,
but she's a person and you're not supposed to kill people. You still go find the fucking person who did the deed.
It's 3 days after he got out. Now, he has never been definitively linked to Seraphia, so this is the only one I have that he's never admitted to. But based on like how she was killed, the fact that Temple, Texas is literally 10 minutes away from Belton, which we know that's where he went right after to his parents' house.
He seems to just leave them in places. Is that like his thing?
He just discards them
wherever. Yeah.
And it was a black sex worker. That's his type. It's very highly likely she was killed by him. She is not always put in every article that I see. I'm just including her because she matters.
Yeah, it's because he wasn't charged for her.
When he does confess to his murder, she is not one that he says, but he didn't have to. The others would have been connected in another way. She wasn't. So why would he admit to more than he had to?
Right.
But I think she was definitely his first victim 3 days after.
Okay.
So the first confirmed victims happened in October of 1991. So this is 2 years after he got out. Do we believe that Kenneth McDuff came out of prison and didn't hurt or kill anyone for 2 full years? Probably not.
No, I do not.
So Brenda K. Thompson was born on June 4th, 1955 in Big Spring, Texas, right outside of Dallas. Not much is known about her early life, but she apparently had it pretty rough. She ended up addicted to drugs and had turned to prostitution to support that addiction. Living this kind of lifestyle really took a toll on Brenda. She was a shell of the beautiful young girl that we see in her high school senior picture, which I have.
Oh, that's so hard.
Life on the streets had caused Brenda to look much older. She was 36 years old. She was 5'5" and she only weighed 115 pounds. She had large brown eyes that were once beautiful, but now she had that sunken look about her.
Right.
And she did have long brown hair that was beautiful at one point, but was now very limp and disheveled, and she would cut it by her own hand as needed. She was also missing a few teeth at this point. She had several aliases, including Deborah Johnson and Debbie Ward, to help evade law enforcement. She had a long history of petty crime, from small thefts to possession of hard drugs. Some of these crimes carried fines and others would have put her in jail. She had been placed on parole in Dallas, and she didn't want to get in trouble for violating that. So she had just moved to Waco.
Okay.
She ended up in the cut area that I mentioned earlier, and she began prostituting. All of the others in the area said that Deborah was very sweet and quiet, and she just kind of kept to herself. She did get arrested a few times for violation of parole by the Waco police, but she would end up back out on the streets after a few days. Even the police characterized her as being soft-spoken and usually very respectful when they took her in, so they didn't really see her as a problem. She's just a girl.
Yeah.
That became addicted to drugs and is trying to live her life.
And she does bad things sometimes to get the drugs. She's not dangerous.
So that is Brenda K. Thompson. We'll talk about her again in a minute, but I also want to bring up at the same time Regina Moore. She had a similar story to Brenda Thompson, but she was much younger. She was only 21 years old.
Okay.
She was even smaller. She was 110 pounds, 5'4",
Wow.
and she had already birthed 3 children by the age of 21.
Okay.
Who she adopted out to her relatives. So that's a good thing. Those children were able to be taken care of. It was said that if she had lived in any different kind of lifestyle, she would have been described as beautiful. She had near perfect teeth naturally. She had reddish hair and she had sparkling blue eyes. But once again, her time on the streets had taken a toll on her, and she also looked much older than her 21 years old.
Mm-hmm.
She was known in the cut as just Gina, and Gina had a very bad rock habit, which led her to reckless behavior, and she was known to run off with her John's wallets after having dates.
Okay.
Unfortunately, one of the men that she took money from was Kenneth McDuff, and he told other prostitutes in the area, "When I find her, I'm going to kill that bitch." So we're now in October 10th of 1991, and there happened to be a checkpoint set up by the Waco police right outside of the cut area. They were just pulling people over to check for like drugs, prostitution, other crimes.
Okay.
Just something that they would do every now and then.
Yep.
On this night, police were working and a red truck pulled up. And as the police approached the vehicle with their flashlight, they saw the driver, which was Kenneth McDuff, and they began to hear screaming.
Oh, no.
In the passenger seat, they saw a woman, now known to be Brenda Thompson, which is the 36-year-old I mentioned first.
Right.
And she appeared to be in distress. She's screaming at the top of her lungs. They said her hands were bound behind her back, and as McDuff pulled up to the stop, she began kicking at the windshield as hard as she possibly could, and it began cracking the windshield.
What?
So the police are seeing this, and they registered immediately what was happening, and Kenneth floored the accelerator. So he just like ran right through. He almost ran over the cops. There were 3 cops there, and they scrambled quickly and got into their vehicles to start chasing him down.
My mouth is just gaped open because I don't understand why he's not in jail after this, because I know that he's not going to be.
He's not going to be.
What the fuck?
This is all of our stories. We just end up going, what the fuck?
What the fuck?
So the cops get in their cars and they start chasing him, but he had already had the lead. And something Kenneth liked to do to evade cops, because he was doing this a lot when he was doing burglaries and stuff like that, he would drive the wrong way down one-way streets to get away.
Oh, okay.
And he did that in this truck, and the cops never found him, and Brenda was never seen again.
How is he not caught after this, though? He can't be invisible for that many years in these small towns.
Waco is not that big of a town.
I know.
Waco's a crazy place. We're going to talk about it again sometime, because I'm going to talk about the cult in Waco.
Yeah, Waco's where the wackos go.
I remember when I was younger, there's parts of Waco you didn't go in. I'm sure the cut was one of them.
Okay.
We would go to the mall and straight back. And my parents, when I started driving, they didn't want me driving to Waco. They would rather me drive to Austin, which is a much bigger city than Waco. So I think Waco just had a lot of like underbelly crap going on. So maybe the cops were just like overwhelmed. I don't know. I'm not trying to give them an excuse. But back to Brenda Thompson. She would not be found until 7 years later.
Oh, wow.
Her body would be recovered eventually. But police made no real attempts to go after McDuff or even seem concerned that Brenda went missing. Other sex workers in the area said that Brenda had gone missing and they had seen her with McDuff, and the cops saw her, or they didn't know it was her, but they saw a woman in the car kicking the windshield.
Right.
And they did nothing.
What the fuck?
Word got out, and everyone that lived in the cut knew that Kenneth McDuff probably killed Brenda Thompson.
Yeah.
But one girl who didn't know was Gina, who I just mentioned.
Right.
And the reason Gina didn't know is because she had been in jail during all of this. She had been in there for, I don't know, probably prostitution, soliciting something. And she came out. Only a few days after Brenda was taken by Kenneth McDuff, a witness that lived there described seeing Gina in the truck with Kenneth.
Okay.
This witness said that he had pulled over asking to purchase some cocaine, and that's when he saw Gina and knew it was her with Kenneth. He believes he was probably the last one to see her alive. McDuff took her to a remote area off a nearby highway, drove down an embankment near a bridge, and we are sure he did unspeakable things to Gina. He did say he was going to kill her. She took his money.
Right.
Her body would also not be found for 7 years.
I'm assuming because he says where they are.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll get into that. But yeah, nobody was looking for Brenda Thompson. But Gina had family. Remember, she had 3 kids that she had adopted out.
Right.
And one of Gina's friends from the cut heard that she had been in the truck from the cocaine dealer. And when she didn't ever show back up, she called her mother, Barbara Carpenter. Now, Barbara Carpenter's a pretty badass woman. She knew her daughter was there and she had issues, but it was still her daughter.
Right.
She drove down to the cut herself and she began walking around asking questions because the cops wouldn't help her. She went to the cops and said, my daughter's missing. And they're like, oh, she's a prostitute. She's probably just, in a car with someone in another state. That's how they responded.
Right.
And Barbara's like, no, fuck this. Someone said she was with Kenneth McDuff. She even showed up to Kenneth McDuff's dorm room.
Oh, wow. She does not give a shit.
But of course he denied it. And he was like, yeah, I hooked up with your daughter, but then I dropped her off at a friend's house. I don't know what happened to her. Nothing that she could do. She knew, most likely. She said that she pressed the cops to do something about it. She knew Kenneth probably did something to her daughter, but she said the cops just never took her seriously. And she said they looked down upon both her daughter and Brenda Thompson as just another prostitute and drug user. They don't spend resources trying to recover women like that.
But you're spending resources to parole this fucking guy out.
I know. And giving him food stamps.
I'm saying that a lot. This is stupid.
So a few days after this, McDuff showed up at a glass shop to get his windshield repaired. And think about this. He killed Brenda and Gina in a matter of like 3 days of each other.
Right.
He showed up to get this windshield repaired, and the technician noticed the way that the windshield was broken was from the inside, and he called the Waco police. He was like, something's up with this. The police came out and questioned McDuff.
What?
And said, how did your windshield get broken?
He's like, oh, remember you guys chasing me? What is not connecting here?
Nothing happened. They did nothing to him, which once again, this is just further feeding into McDuff's feeling that he can do whatever he wants. And he starts bragging to everyone that he's so much smarter than the Waco Police Department and nothing will ever happen to him.
Well, yeah, because nothing is happening to him.
It's kind of the truth. So 1 month later, after not being able to afford to fix the windshield on his truck and maybe that guy didn't want to fix it. Maybe he was like, no, fuck off.
This is evidence. I'm not getting rid of it.
He showed back up at his parents' house in Belton and he said, I need a new car.
She's like, but this is the 10th one.
Okay, baby,
Can you calm
whatever.
down?
His dad thought it was odd to see the windshield was broken. He knew something had happened, but he was afraid to ask his own son.
He's probably scared of his own son, too.
I think he was. He also later told police that it wouldn't have mattered because whatever Kenneth said was always a lie. He said nothing that came out of his son's mouth was believable. I don't know. He's still married to Addie. I don't know what their relationship is like.
He's probably scared of her too.
I don't know.
He's probably a very weak man and he knows it. And just kind of is like, well, this is my life. It's not like I have ambition to go do something else. Like, whatever.
I'm just going to go to work, which is what he did.
Living.
Addie, his forever doting mother, replaced the truck with a tan 1985 Ford Thunderbird. This car will become a pivotal piece of evidence in his future murders.
Okay.
So now Kenneth McDuff, feeling invincible, is going to kind of make a turn. I don't know if he wanted more of a challenge or whatever, but he's going to go back to victimizing women who were not as easily dismissed as, unfortunately, the sex workers were.
Okay.
And so I want to talk about Colleen Reed. She is probably one of the ones most people would associate with him because they did an Unsolved Mysteries show on Colleen Reed. And when I was living in this area, I remember seeing billboards with Colleen Reed's picture on it because she was abducted and nobody knew what happened to her for a long time and it was all over the news.
Okay.
So let's talk about Colleen first before I go into the unfortunate ending for her. Colleen was born April 23rd, 1963 in the town of Ville Platte in the Evangeline Parish of Louisiana. We have a kitty visitor today. Colleen was the youngest daughter to Alan and Pat Reed. Her sister Lorraine, who went by Lori, was only 18 months older than her. and they were very close, oftentimes calling themselves twins.
Oh.
Her father, Pat, had 2 daughters from a previous marriage that were much older than Colleen and Lori. Their names were Anita and May. So when Colleen was graduating from kindergarten, May, her stepsister, was graduating from high school. So quite a big age difference. Yeah. But the older stepsisters loved their younger siblings.
That's good.
Even though they said they would be annoying sometimes.
Yeah.
When May was going off to college, Colleen started packing her little suitcase too and said she wanted to go with her.
That's so cute.
Her sisters remembered Colleen as being quite the tomboy growing up in the Bayou area. She would ride her Shetland pony out into the trees. She would go catch frogs. She wasn't afraid of snakes. One time she even threw one of the snakes at her older sister to try and scare her.
Poor snake. He's like, wee, like, what the fuck?
She had a high-pitched laugh that they all remember, and she was full of life and lived a very happy childhood. Lori was the rebellious one of the 2 sisters, and she dreamed of living in Austin, Texas, because her father had been stationed in San Antonio years ago when he was in the Air Force, and he always talked about how much he loved Austin. And for whatever reason, Lori, before the age of 17, got a wild hair, and she just took off in a truck to go live in Texas and married some guy she met.
Oh, wow.
Colleen really missed her, and she would often take trips to visit Lori, and she fell in love with Austin as well. I love Austin too. There's a lot of cool things to do there. Mm-hmm. But then they had a strain in their relationship because Colleen decided to follow in her sister's footsteps and get married to her high school sweetheart at the age of 17.
Oh, wow.
Lori said, no, don't do that. That's going to be a mistake. And she said that. She's like, I got married too young and it wasn't the right move. Colleen was married for 2 years and then it ended in divorce because 17, you don't make the best decisions.
Nope.
Colleen did go on to attend LSU and finished her degree in accounting, and she got her CPA certification, and she took her first job in New Orleans. She had a boyfriend named Jamil at the time, and he was working for Marriott Hotels, and he was given the opportunity to transfer to Austin, Texas. And Colleen was glad to follow along. She wanted to be closer to her sister anyways. So Lori and Colleen were happy to be back in the city that they both loved. Colleen went through a bitter split with Jamil about 2 years after, and she ended up moving in with Lori because Lori also went through a divorce right around the same time, and they really bonded. And Lori had 2 young children that she was raising, and they just were extraordinarily close.
Yeah.
Colleen got a job working as an accountant for the LCRA in Austin, and there she met a man named Oliver. He was her manager, and they fell in love. They moved in together, but he had just come out of a divorce, and he was like, I'm not ready for any kind of commitment right now. And so they didn't live together too long. And that's when Colleen moved out into an apartment of her own.
Oh, okay.
It was there that she noticed a stray cat in the parking lot.
Yay.
And she took him in as her own. She named him Minu, which is Cajun slang for cat. So she's now 28 years old. She's doing very well in her career. She actually had received several promotions while working at LCRA and was now managing a group of other accountants. Colleen was very attractive. She had large brown eyes and she has shoulder-length dark brown hair. However, she was never quite happy with her figure, as none of us girls are.
Yeah.
She wanted to get into better shape. She was always jealous. Lori was the naturally tall, thin, lanky one, and she wanted to be more like her sister. This is a crazy way to get in shape. She joined the Army Reserves.
Actually, when I was going to join the Air Force,
that was why? Or
it was a perk, someone forcing you to get into
shape.
You have
to. And she did. She got in great shape.
Yeah.
She looked better than she ever had. She loved it. But her and her sister, lives get busy. Lori ended up remarrying and she was raising her 2 kids. So they weren't seeing each other as often, but they would still get together every 1 to 2 weeks. So that's bringing us to the holidays of 1991. At Christmas time, she spent time with her sister Lori and her new husband, and she had started kind of reconnecting with Oliver, the boyfriend who wasn't ready for commitment. They had rekindled and he realized she was the one he wanted to be with, and they were really making their relationship work. They weren't living together yet. Again, they were keeping their separate apartments and seeing where it went.
Yeah.
Things seemed to be going very well, but that wouldn't last long. On December 29th of 1991, Colleen was abducted from a car wash in Austin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's scary.
This was a scary, scary story. I remember seeing this on the news and just being like, oh my God. And everyone was afraid because it's like,
yeah, you're just doing a normal thing and someone just comes and grabs you.
So that morning of December 29th, she had been working as a volunteer with the LCRA's flood hotline. And then she went to church with her boyfriend, Oliver. They went to lunch. And then that afternoon, she was just tired from the holidays. And she said, I'm just going to go back and take a nap. She ended up napping longer than she thought. She thought it would be like an hour because she had a lot of errands she wanted to do that day.
Mm-hmm.
And she ended up waking up at like 7 p.m. and being like, oh, fuck. You know,
Oh, wow.
we all do that.
Yeah.
We wake up and it's like, oh, my day's gone. At 7 p.m., she called Oliver and she said, I'm just going to run out and do my errands and then I'll head over to your house.
Okay.
So what we know she went out and did is she deposited some cash that she had gotten for Christmas from her parents. And we have the snapshot of her at the ATM. Then she went to the Whole Foods in downtown Austin and she picked up a few grocery items that were found in her car later.
In 1991, there was Whole Foods?
So Whole Foods started in Austin, Texas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The original one was probably this one she was at.
Okay.
She left the market around 9 p.m. and she got to the car wash. Something about Colleen is she had a little Mazda Miata, which were huge back in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
She had just gotten the car, I think, a few months ahead of Christmas. It was kind of like a little
Gift to herself.
thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
And she had been meaning to wash it for a few days and she was like trying to keep it in great shape. So she's like, I'm just going to swing into the car wash
Oh, no.
and wash my car.
Okay.
We know she arrived at the car wash around 9:10 p.m. On that night, 3 young men happened to cross paths with her kidnappers. So we had witnesses for this one. So at 8:55 p.m., Steve Marks was on his way to meet his 2 brother-in-laws, Mike and Bill Goines, at one of their girlfriend's houses, which was near where this car wash is going to be. As they were pulling up to the girl's house, they pulled up behind a tan-colored Thunderbird. They noticed it was driving very slowly. He followed down the street and then he just pulled into his girlfriend's house and he watched the other car pull up into the parking garage ahead of them and make a U-turn.
Oh, okay.
When he got to the house and was talking to his brother-in-laws, they mentioned they saw the same car acting kind of odd, and they said it was driving the wrong way on a one-way street.
Oh.
Which we know Kenneth McDuff likes to do.
He owns the streets.
Yeah. They thought it was odd, but didn't really think anything more of it, and were just hanging out on their porch, having some drinks and catching up.
Okay.
The house was about 200 feet away from a do-it-yourself car wash.
Oh, wow. So right there.
Yes.
Okay.
So they're just hanging out on the front porch, and a few minutes later, they hear a scream. They said it was very obviously a distress scream, and they all just like stopped. And then they said they heard a car door slam. They realized it was coming from the car wash, but all they could see from their porch was the side of the car wash where the vacuum cleaners were.
Oh.
Shortly after hearing the scream and the door slam, they saw a car pull out of the car wash and start going the wrong way down the one-way street again, and that it nearly hit 2 other vehicles in the process.
And it was the Thunderbird?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They said it was the tan Thunderbird that they had just seen make the U-turn. So now they're like, okay. So Steve and Bill, the brothers, ran over to the car wash.
They found a car with
They noticed,
no one.
they noticed a car. It was a white 1991 Mazda Miata convertible in one of the stalls. It was partially washed. It was still covered in soap.
Oh.
One of its doors was open. They walked up to the car. They saw a purse in there, the keys, and groceries. They realized something was wrong and they called the cops right away.
Good.
So this is like best case scenario for someone being abducted.
Right.
They were quickly able to identify that the owner of the car was Colleen, and then the police started whatever they do, APBs or whatever. Her abduction occurred the same month as another high-profile crime that happened, which I have on the docket to talk about too, because the 90s in Central Texas, who knew?
Wild.
Which was called the yogurt shop murders.
Okay.
I'll bring them up because at one point they thought Kenneth McDuff might be responsible for the yogurt shop murders too. When Colleen went missing, it like sent Austin, Texas into a state of panic because 3 girls had been killed at the yogurt shop murders and now a woman had just been taken from the car wash.
Yeah. They think it's a serial killer. Little
think
do they
something's
know it's 2.
Right.
Fuck.
That's even more fucked up.
Yeah.
Because yes, they have definitely ruled out Kenneth McDuff did not commit the yogurt shop murders. Now, Kenneth McDuff wasn't thought of at first for Colleen because he wasn't ever in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
He was always in Belton and going the other direction. He was always going to Waco and then up to Dallas. He rarely ever went to Austin. It wasn't thought that Kenneth was connected to this until they started looking into the statements from these 3 people.
Oh, okay.
And realized that Kenneth McDuff had titled a 1985 tan Thunderbird. It also triggered that there were other disappearances in the area. And now they're starting to think, okay, maybe Kenneth McDuff is up to something.
He is. You guys already knew he would be.
So the McNamaras that I mentioned earlier are on it at this point, along with the sheriff that's in Falls County. They heard about this and heard that there might be a possible link. The McNamaras were U.S. Rangers, so they have jurisdiction all over the state if they can prove that he has committed some kind of crime against the state, versus other jurisdictions have to stick to their county. So the McNamaras were pretty sure that McDuff was probably their guy, and they began running through a list of his buddies, and they were looking for someone who fit the description of the second occupant of the tan car. These 3 men were able to give a kind of idea of what the men looked like, and they had mentioned that it was a Hispanic or dark-complected white male. And as they were going through the list, they came across Alva Hank Worley. Okay. He was a concrete worker who was known to hang out with McDuff. He fit the description. Something about him, they felt like he was hiding something and seemed like he wanted to confess. He lived with his 14-year-old daughter at a motel in Temple, Texas.
Oh, wow.
And late one night, they showed up with a deputy from the Bell County Sheriff's Department knocking on his door. And he was like, I barely know the guy. We just hang out sometimes. They said the way he acted was not normal. He just kind of tried to blow it off, like distance himself from it. So they decided they were just going to keep pushing for it. And the way that they got him is they said, Hank, do you know that you're hiding a kid killer you're protecting? Hank had no idea about the Broomstick murders.
Yeah.
And then they were like, you have a 14-year-old daughter. Do you know what he did to Louise? And then at that point, Hank just started crying. So
he had been in a position just like
Roy Dale Green.
Yeah.
They actually said that. They said they saw him as another version of Roy Dale Green. So this is the story that Hank confessed. He said that on December 29th, McDuff showed up at his house and they were going to go out. He told his girlfriend, wife, I don't remember which one it is, that they were just going to go out drinking that night. But actually they were going to Austin, of all places, because they knew a guy down there that was selling drugs. While they were driving, he said Kenneth McDuff just talked about wanting to find a girl to use up.
Ugh.
This was a term he said to other men over the years. It's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah.
And you can only imagine what that means to him.
He's taking everything from them when the only thing left is death.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Excuse my cat. It's very inconvenient.
After they had scored some drugs and they were just driving around because that's what Kenneth liked to do, they saw Colleen at the car wash. After circling the car wash twice, which is what the 3 men saw them doing. That's why they had seen her and they were just kind of looking. He said Kenneth pulled into a stall next to Colleen, and then he just got out of the car, and he said Kenneth grabbed her by the throat and brought her back to the car.
Oh my God.
So I think this is another Roy Dale thing where, you know, Kenneth is talking about wanting to use up a woman, and he's like, whatever, dude.
Okay,
he knows
he
goes to sex workers and stuff. So he's
Right.
like probably just going to get a prostitute. Then he sees this girl
and
they
then
pull
just
into the
grabs
car
her.
wash, and he's like, what the fuck, dude? It happened so quickly. And then here he is back with a girl holding her by the throat because she was small enough. I mean, Kenneth McDuff's a fucking huge dude.
Yeah.
McDuff then told Hank to tie her hands up behind her, and he was going to drive. So once again, here's a guy who could have done the right thing, but he just went along with it.
Yeah.
I will also mention that Hank Worley has a criminal background. I didn't see any violent criminal, but he runs with that kind of crowd. He wasn't as innocent, I guess, as I would say Roy Dale was.
Right. These are grown men now.
He's a grown man.
Yeah.
He's also high on crack cocaine.
Yeah.
Which changes people. He said they drove on I-35 for several miles outside of Austin. While McDuff was driving, Hank was in the back seat with Colleen. And at some point, McDuff pulled over and told him to get out. He wanted to get in the back seat with Colleen. And then Hank was driving and Kenneth started having his way with Colleen. And then at one point when he was done, he said, hey, Hank, do you want a chance at this? And they pulled over at an exit. And this doesn't sound like Hank was forced to do this.
Okay.
Hank got in the back and he also took advantage of Colleen. As they were coming back into Belton, It's about an hour drive from Austin to this part of Belton, Texas. So she was just being repeatedly raped by both men. They were also beating her, and it was mentioned that they were burning her with their cigarettes.
Okay.
They then came up to a dirt road that was near where Kenneth's parents lived. And it was there that Kenneth raped Colleen again. And then he knocked her unconscious and put her in the trunk of his car. Hank said at that point, he told him that he was going to use her up. Hank believed that meant that Kenneth was going to kill her, but he wasn't there for the rest of it. He said that Kenneth took him back home and dropped him back off. And then he asked Hank if he could borrow a pocket knife and a shovel.
Oh, geez.
Hank said he never saw Colleen after that, and he really doesn't know what Kenneth did with her, but he says she was alive when they left. Hank coming forward and confessing to this is what will eventually get Kenneth McDuff caught.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there would be 2 more victims before Hank talked, I guess, because as I said before, the McNamara's were showing up and they couldn't get him to confess.
Right.
So while this is going on, he was committing other crimes. So that was in December of 1991 that Colleen was abducted and killed. In February of 1992, Kenneth would take another victim. Her name is Valencia K. Johnson. She was born on November 28, 1969 in Lubbock, Texas. Valencia often went by her middle name Kay. She was caught in her early teens for shoplifting in the Dallas area. Unfortunately, she continued to spiral downwards. She dropped out of Arlington High School and began to work truck stops while she was still underage.
Oh, wow.
Her sister admitted that the family knew Kay was working as a prostitute, but they did not know often where she was, and they did not know that she was in the Waco area in February of 1992. Perhaps she went down there similar to Brenda to evade her probation in the Dallas area.
Yeah.
She was young, 22 years old. She's a very pretty black girl. She was thin. She was about 5'7", just the type of girl that Kenneth McDuff liked to schedule dates with as a sex worker.
Okay.
She had the misfortune of coming into contact with Kenneth on February 24th, 1992. A student living in the dorm room 117 recalls hearing a knock at the window, and he opened it up and saw this pretty young black girl there, and she told him she was looking for Kenneth McDuff's room. He told her it was one room over, number 118, and she went to that room. That dorm room student was probably the last person to see her alive. Kay was never reported as missing by her family, and no one even knew she was a victim until they found her body buried in a shallow grave outside of the TSTC campus. The only reason they found her is because they had started at that point looking for Colleen.
Oh, okay.
And they at that point knew Kenneth McDuff because Hank had confessed.
Okay.
And they started searching the woods, and this is when they found Kay's body.
Wow.
Kenneth did admit to killing her along with some of the others when he admits to all of this. We know that she died by strangulation, and we can only imagine what else he did to her.
Yeah.
And this brings me to the last known victim of Kenneth McDuff, and that is Melissa Ann Northrup. Kenneth first came into contact with Melissa when he took that job at the Quick Pack that I mentioned earlier. He had that supervisor trainer.
Oh, the wife.
He met the wife.
Yeah.
He thought she was really cute. She was very cute. And he seemed to have like this obsession with Melissa for months, maybe even years. He would often tell various people when he would drive past the Quick Pack that there was a cute little cashier in there, and he would like to take her someday.
Wow.
So he had just killed Kay on February 24th. On March 1st, 1992, that day arrived when he finally decided he would take Melissa.
That's even scarier. It's like you meet this person and they've been thinking about you all those years.
Yeah, this one really disturbs me. Melissa Ann Northrup was another girl when she went missing that her pictures were all up on the billboards.
Okay.
So if you went from Belton, where I live, down towards Austin, you saw pictures of Colleen. And if you went from Belton towards Dallas, you saw pictures of Melissa.
Wow.
Because she went missing in the Waco area.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about who Melissa Ann Northrup was. Interestingly enough, she grew up in Louisiana, very near where Colleen Reed grew up.
Oh, wow. Okay.
About 40 miles away, actually, in a small town called Rain. She was born to Brenda and Clebert Lagar. He was a Frenchman, but her mother and father broke up while she was very young. She moved with her mother, Brenda, and a new stepfather that her mother married when she was around 14 to Texas. She was a tiny, tiny thing. She was less than 5 feet tall and she only weighed around 100 pounds.
Wow. He does like the little tiny ones, it sounds like.
It does seem like that.
Just very petite. Something
she was
he
very
can
petite.
grab.
She was very cute. She was beautiful. When she was 16 years old, she became infatuated with an older boy and he convinced her to run away from home. The young couple ended up in Kansas and got married. So she has a very similar story to Colleen.
It's true.
Yeah. They did have 2 children together, a boy and a girl, but then they broke up because young marriage. They moved back in with her mother, Brenda, and stepfather, Richard. They told her that she could live with them as long as she wanted, but she needed to provide for the children and basically work a job the whole time. And they would give her like free written board and they would help her with daycare.
Okay.
She was a hard worker and she genuinely wanted to provide well for her son and daughter, but she didn't have a high school diploma. She had dropped out to run off with this guy. And so she was kind of stuck taking low paying jobs. She was working at like taco places, Whataburger, and she ended up working at the Quick Pack. And that is where in the summer of 1990, she met an employee there and his name was Aaron Northrup. They were married on June 17th, 1990. Aaron was also a high school dropout and he was kind of stuck taking lower paying jobs, but he had worked his way up at the Quick Pack. They were making okay money.
Yeah.
They were living in a small house of their own outside of Waco in a little town called Hewitt. Because they were both working and they were trying to take care of the children, Aaron would work during the day and Melissa was taking the night shifts.
That's rough.
She wanted to be there when the kids were awake.
Yeah,
which
I mean, it
totally
makes
sense as a mother, but
it's just rough when I see that with a couple.
Yeah.
Then you're never
together.
seeing them ever.
And that was what was happening. It creeps me out because she's less than 5 foot, you know, she's 100 pounds and they have her working by herself
at night
at
that
the convenience store. And Kenneth McDuff knew that because he had met her husband and he knew she worked at this store. So
yeah.
And it was known that he would frequently go in there to like buy cigarettes or get gas or whatever just to look at her.
And it's not like she's in one of those places where she's like behind bulletproof glass.
Yeah, or like in a little locked booth.
Right.
I've seen some of
those.
That. I did see too where this location was. It was kind of in an area where there were no other businesses around that were open at night. So it was kind of right off of the interstate and in a business park where she really was completely by herself at night.
That's so scary.
In fact, she talked about that from the beginning. She had concerns about the safety of the Quick Pack that she had been assigned to. She was completely responsible for the cash register and the contents of the store, but she had to go outside to go to the bathroom.
Oh.
And there was no key to lock the front door when she would go outside.
What? They must not care about that particular location.
Apparently not. She also would have to go in and stock the vault, which was like the refrigerator in the store. And she told her mother, she's like, when I'm back there, if someone comes in the store, I can't even hear them.
Oh. How scary.
Yeah. Her shift would start at 11 p.m. and end at 7 a.m. She was also telling everyone that she was looking for another job because she just wasn't making enough money and she didn't feel safe.
Yeah.
She would work until 7 a.m. in the morning and then she would sleep until about 2:30 p.m. and she would get up and she would spend time with her kids from 2:30 till 9 p.m. and then put them to bed and then head into the store at 11 p.m. So she was kind of stuck working this shift because it was the one that worked the best for her with what she could get based on her education and still be with her children. Kenneth actually graduated between Killing Kay and March 1st, 1992. He graduated from TSTC and he was at the point now where he no longer had free room and board because he had to move out once he graduated.
What,
and
you can't get your master's in whatever
machine operations. And so he didn't know where he was going to go. And so what does he do? He decides he's going to go out on a drug-fueled crack cocaine adventure. And while he's out, his car starts having problems.
Oh.
So he takes it into a auto shop and they said it's going to be like $900 to fix. He has a credit card from Addie, so he gets the car fixed. Now we're up to February 29th because it's a leap year in 1992.
Mm-hmm.
And he decides he's going to go out looking for drugs again, and he has car trouble.
Again.
He ends up pulling over at the exit where Melissa is working.
And he's like, I've wanted her for a while now, and now I'm in the mood.
Yeah, and he's already frustrated.
Yeah.
Also, he had applied for a job in Victoria, Texas. That was a machining job. And he had found out on February 29th he was not getting that job.
Oh.
So there's just like all these things. So what does a man like him do? It's time to kill somebody to let that rage out.
He's probably like, I'm trying to do this normal shit, guys, and it's not working.
Yeah.
He was killing anyway.
But remember, he always makes up excuses because it's not about him.
Oh, yeah.
Aaron would often go to the store and hang out with Melissa because he knew she was feeling like unsafe. So he would hang out with her as late as he could before he had to go home and sleep for his shift the next day.
Oh, well, that's nice.
He had visited her at the store and he stayed until about 1:30 a.m. And then she told him, you just need to go home and get some sleep.
Yeah, because he would have to be there when? Like 7?
Yeah, he's probably coming in at 7. I feel bad for this young couple, really. Yeah. They're just trying to make it work. And unfortunately, that's the way it is in America if you don't have education.
Yeah.
The other thing is that Melissa had just found out that she's pregnant.
Oh, man.
She was 2.5 months pregnant. And that was another reason he was hanging out at the store. And they were talking about like future plans. And they were kind of in that honeymoon stage again because it's like, oh, we're going to have another baby. We're going to figure this out. I love you so much. All of that.
Yeah.
And then she's finally like at 1:30. She's like, okay, this is enough. You got to go home. Just after 3 a.m., Aaron woke up and was just thinking about her and he called her. She did answer the phone at 3 a.m., but she said, hey, I'm busy stalking. Let me call you back in a minute. And then she never did. He called her again at 3:45 a.m. to tell her he was going to bed, but she said, I'm still kind of busy. And he's like, never mind, we'll just talk later. And then he said around 4 a.m., he was woken up by his sister that Melissa was on the phone. He answered the phone and he was really short with her. And this really bothers him to this day.
Yeah.
He was just like, I'm trying to get some sleep. I love you. Bye. And then he said only about 5 minutes later, he felt bad. And he called back to the store because he just wanted to tell her, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And he said no one answered.
Oh, that's rough.
So poor guy. He still couldn't get out of his mind. So he kept calling the store, but nobody was answering. And he decided something must be wrong. So he got into the car and drove up to the store, which is about 14 minutes away.
Okay.
He got to the store at 4:45 and he found a customer standing there waiting to be checked out. And he asked the customer where the clerk was. And the man said, I don't know. I've been calling out and asking for someone, but nobody's answering. Aaron immediately jumped over the counter and he hit the no sale button on the cash register. When he opened it, there was no money in the till.
Oh, no.
He also saw Melissa's purse under the counter where she always put it and a notepad. This is sad. Full of prospective names for the child that they were about to have. He knew something was wrong, but he went out quickly just to see if she was in the restroom, and she was not. And at that time, it was 4:47 a.m. He called 911.
Did they have cameras?
No, that was the other thing I should have mentioned. When Kenneth was working at the store, he found that out, that none of the quick packs used cameras.
Oh,
they didn't invest in it.
You have to protect your people. That's ridiculous.
How can you expect someone to work these kind of jobs?
I know.
There was a set of witnesses that saw a tan Thunderbird pull up to the convenience store.
Okay.
It was around 2 a.m. They were staying at the New Road Inn and they had been out at the bars having a good time, and they had come back to the hotel, and from the hotel you could see the convenience store. He took his wife in. She had had too much to drink, but they had a little Cocker Spaniel with them and he needed to go walk the dog before bed. And when he walked out, he noticed a man standing near this Thunderbird we now know was Kenneth McDuff. He noticed that the car seemed to have been broken down. And so he called out to the man and he said, hey, do you need some help? It looked like he was trying to push the car himself. And he's like, no, I got it. And then he just went on. After that, witnesses and everything that we were able to find out, what happened is that Kenneth McDuff's Thunderbird did break down and he was close enough that he walked into the store and he talked to Melissa.
Did she have a car?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So she had a brown Buick. He basically abducted her, put her in the Buick, and took off and left his Thunderbird there, which was really good because that's what's going to eventually get him caught.
Yeah.
We know that he drove down I-35 towards Dallas quite a ways. In fact, almost 100 miles. There's no witnesses to what he did to her like we have with Hank and Colleen. He took Melissa near a small community called Columbine. It is one of the most remote areas of Dallas County. The country roads are very narrow and they're bordered on both sides by just vacant tracts of farmland. Sometimes there's like trailer parks or small neighborhoods throughout there, but not a lot. There is, though, a huge gravel pit area where they would, I guess, kind of like a quarry. He turned onto a little unmarked dirt path road, and at that point, her car actually bogged down in the mud.
Oh, okay.
And he couldn't drive any further. He was able to kind of push it into a grassy area. Nobody knows how he got out of this area because he's 100 miles away. All he has is her car. It's stuck. He was never seen leaving the area.
Interesting.
Melissa's body would be eventually found in that gravel pit, which was about a half a mile from where the car was parked. So he must have made her march down there after he did unspeakable acts to her. He took her socks and the laces from her tennis shoes, and he used those to tie her feet and her hands behind her back. Her car was found a few days later by somebody who was driving out those pathways because some of the gravel pits would be filled in with water and men would go fishing in them. And there was a man driving down that dirt road and saw this abandoned Buick car. Mm-hmm. By that point, they knew Melissa was missing and they were able to connect the car back to Melissa.
Oh, okay.
And they realized that Melissa's Buick was found and McDuff's Thunderbird was found so close to where that quick pack station was, they knew it was him.
Yeah.
And the McNamaras were on it.
Oh, her poor babies.
I know. Another interesting thing that happens right around this time is Addie McDuff files a missing persons report for Kenneth.
What?
She said he disappeared after he graduated from Waco and she doesn't know where he is and she's worried for her baby boy son.
Oh my God.
Police, realizing that Kenneth is now connected to both Colleen and now Melissa, put together a task force that's like throughout the whole state, and they start putting all of the stuff together. They've got lawmen from all these counties. They've got local police departments. They even had the ATF involved because he had bought drugs. They were finding any reason so that they could have all the law enforcement because this was a dangerous man on the loose and nobody had any idea where he was.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, well, go arrest him first. Obviously, he's just doing whatever.
He literally left the Buick on the side of the road in Dallas and nobody knew what happened to him. We do know somebody had to help him.
Yeah, he probably hitchhiked.
There's no cell phones back in these days. He got out somewhere and probably called his mom. When the McNamaras were doing a lot of their research, they would go and visit J.A. and Addie's house. And they said one time they went there and there was a pair of boots and things that obviously belonged to Kenneth that had not been there like a week before. So they do think that she was aiding and abetting and helping him.
Okay.
They started interviewing all of the people who knew McDuff, his associates, whatever you want to call them. They said they weren't getting much information about where he went, and they had the feeling that people were afraid. They don't want to snitch on him.
Yeah.
He'll kill you.
Yeah.
But what they had was Hank's confession. And so when they got that, they put that out there. And on May 1st of 1992, America's Most Wanted actually featured a search for Kenneth McDuff.
Wow.
And 50 tips came in, and one of those came from Kansas City, Missouri. The police received a call from a viewer who said they think that they're working alongside Kenneth McDuff. He had been working as a garbage collector and was using the name Richard Fowler.
So he just disappeared after that?
And ended up in Kansas for months.
Wow.
So for 2 months, he was gone.
Okay.
America's Most Wanted featured him with his picture, and somebody was like, that's him. They said that the guy that they were working with as the garbage collector kept telling stories about womanizing and was just kind of a creeper. Yeah. And as soon as they saw the picture, they're like, this is our fucking guy. So on May 4th, just 3 days after the feature ran on America's Most Wanted, they arrested Kenneth McDuff. He was living in a homeless shelter in Kansas City. Wow. He was initially charged with just the murder of Melissa Northrup because they had evidence with his car and her car, and they were able to find DNA and connect him. In February of 1993, it took them a while to get everything put together for the trial. It did begin for Melissa Northrup's abduction and death. Once again, Kenneth was on the stand, lying through his teeth and showing no remorse. His mother, Addie, showed up once again to defend him, saying that he was a good boy and everyone was just out to get him. But people knew better by this point. Kenneth was a danger to society. Yes. And it didn't take long. By February 23rd, 1994, a jury convicted him on all the charges. And on March 1st, he was sentenced to death for the second time.
And stays, right?
Yes. Okay. Just a couple months later, in April 1993, he was also charged with Colleen's abduction, rape, and murder, although her body was never found.
Wow.
So although her body was never found and a murder weapon was never found, they once again had enough evidence to connect him because of Hank Worley and the eyewitnesses that had seen him.
Right.
In September of 1994, Hank Worley pleaded guilty to aggravated sexual assault in relation to Colleen's case, and he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The charges of murder and abduction were dropped as a result of a plea deal for him to get McDuff.
Oh.
He has been denied parole several times. He is still in prison today, and he's not eligible for release until May of 2032. So Hank is off the street. I didn't go into as much detail about him, but he was not as innocent as Roy Dale.
Right.
I think he knew what Kenneth was doing. I think he was along for the ride.
Yeah.
He did rape her. It also came out later that he did not leave. He actually was there when Kenneth killed Colleen and threw her body away. But he was never able to help the police find her body. Hank's not a good guy. I'm glad he's in prison.
Okay. I feel bad for his 14-year-old daughter, but maybe it's best he's away from her.
Probably. So we're in 1997 at this point, and Kenneth's trying every stop, and Mama's there spending all the money trying to get him off death row, but nobody's going to let him out again.
No.
Texas is embarrassed now because they let this guy out on parole. It's a national tragedy news.
Yeah.
Texas is a fucking laughingstock. And this actually led to them changing the laws on parole. If you had been convicted of certain levels, you could never end up on the parole board. They call them the McDuff laws. I didn't write a lot of this down, but it did get written into law. And this is also why a lot of people believe Texas is so hardcore about the death penalty now, is because of Kenneth McDuff.
Okay.
So if you get the death penalty now, good luck. You're probably never going to get off in parole. I believe it's something like if you've ever been sentenced to death, you can never be paroled.
Well, I mean,
which
here's the thing. Unless it is a case of mistaken identity.
Yes.
But otherwise, if you're literally going to take someone's life away, and that's what you've come to the conclusion of, why would you give them the chance to walk out?
I've said on here before, I don't believe in the death penalty. You know, when we're talking about Sean Sellers and some of those other ones that are, this one is a clear case.
I know.
Fucking kill this guy.
He's not going to do anything good. Well, you just can't let them out.
Yeah, or lock him away forever.
Lock him away.
Either way. But
I don't know.
This guy... He did not get off. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And on October 6, 1998, he received the word that he was not going to be granted a stay and he would die.
Wow. They
did allow him to come off of death row for about a week in exchange for him leading the police to Colleen's remains.
Okay.
They did find her. She was found just outside of Marlin, Texas, about 100 miles northeast of Austin. They were able to identify her through dental records, and he also led them to two other victims' bodies, those of Brenda Thompson and Regina Moore.
Mm-hmm.
On November 17th, 1998, at 6:08 p.m., McDuff was executed by lethal injection. His mother, Addie, had arrived earlier in the day, and she wanted to speak with her son, but she got there about an hour later, and she never got to speak with him before he went to death row.
How are you late?
I don't know.
On that day?
I
don't understand.
Whatever.
Okay.
I'm sure he would have just lied to her, and she would have told him that he was a good little boy.
Yeah.
The 74-year-old father of Robert Brand, which was one of the young boys killed, he was present that day.
Yeah.
And a journalist interviewed him, and he said, "I've been waiting for this day for 32 years now."
Oh, wow.
It also said that there were witnesses present from 4 other of the victims' families. I don't know which victims, but they were there to witness. The only ones present as family for Kenneth McDuff were the 3 sons of his late brother, Lonnie. So apparently Lonnie had some kids.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They said Kenneth stared at the ceiling the entire time while the injection was administered, and his last words were, "I am ready to be released. Release me." McDuff is now buried in the Captain Joe Bird Cemetery, which is also known as Peckerwood Hill in Huntsville, Texas.
Okay.
Prisoners buried there are those whose family chose not to claim their remains, which I think is interesting. That Addie did not. His headstone contains only his date of execution and an X, meaning that he was executed by the state of Texas, and his death row number. So they don't even give them a name.
Oh, wow.
Kenneth was 52 when he was executed. Before his execution, he did confess to 8 murders. He confessed to the 3 murders that we already knew of Robert, Marcus, and Louise. And then he also confessed to Colleen, Melissa, Brenda, Regina, and Valencia. K, also known as K.
Yeah.
However, we all know, and authorities strongly believe, he's responsible for many, many other murders that we may never know.
He was just too brazen. He just did whatever the fuck he wanted.
He enjoyed killing.
Yeah. He's just evil. He's pure evil.
This kind of case just astounds me that people like this exist.
Like this is why we choose the bear.
Always. I'll always choose the bear.
It's crazy.
And Kenneth did things to these women that is 1,000 times worse than being mauled by a bear. I know what he did to Louise.
He just fucking goes and grabs them just because he wanted to. And that's the issue. You and I were talking off mic. It's that as women, there's no one way to approach a man like this because he liked hurting. But something you didn't really say was that he wouldn't hurt some women who sometimes would stand up, had confidence. We don't know how to approach any man because it's every which way.
Because if you're too confident to another man, that might piss him off so much that he's got to take you down a few pegs.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Kenneth McDuff, there was one woman from the cut in Waco, and she had many encounters with him. And she said that she told him several times, I ain't afraid of you. And he never messed with her. He never did anything bad to her. I think they only had one date. It was almost like he respected her. But then other women he chose to abuse in every which way, even when they were just sex worker dates.
Mm-hmm.
And then the things he did to these girls.
If she had done that to another man,
he would have,
thinks he is allowed to take her regardless, it would have been a different situation.
I know.
You never know what you're going to deal with. She was in a fucking car wash.
That's, Colleen's, or Melissa, she's just at her work.
She's at her actual job.
And we don't know how he abducted her because there's no cameras. I'm sure he just came in and grabbed her. She's a tiny little thing. He probably grabbed her by the neck and took her right out to her car and drove off because nobody else was there because...
It's in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere.
It was 4 a.m. It was sometime between 3:45 and 4 a.m.
Yeah.
His car broke down. He's pissed. He's high on cocaine. And he's like, I'm going to go take this girl. And he did. And he did it many, many, many times. And I'm glad he's off the streets. I wish we could find all of the Kenneth McDuffs out there, especially before they kill this many women.
Oh my gosh. It's just...
He should have never been out.
No, he should have never been out.
He showed his colors when he killed 3 children in 1966.
Yes.
He should have rotted in jail forever.
Forever.
If they didn't want to put him to death because of the Supreme Court's decision, fine. But
whatever.
Why was this man included in the paroles? And it all goes back to his fucking mom enabling him and hiring this lawyer. Like, you think about butterfly effect and all of that. It's like she hired this lawyer that was able to somehow convince one parole member. That one parole member is what led to him eventually being let go and killing all these other women.
Yep. Because she just wasn't paying attention.
Yep.
And she didn't look into it further.
So if you are on a parole board and that is your job, like, take it fucking seriously.
Yeah.
Like I said, all of these people regret it now.
Let go of the people who are there for weed charges.
Yeah, those all need to be gone.
That's ridiculous.
I think back to the I-5 killer, and he had been exposing himself and assaulting. If there's any of that, like, that person needs to stay somewhere where they can be watched. Mm-hmm. But I also think that we have this perception that if somebody comes out on parole, they're still being watched. This case proves me they're not being watched at all.
No. I mean, sometimes you will have someone who is a stickler.
Right.
But for the most part, if they have too many people that are under them, people get away with it.
And they're probably paid nothing to do that job.
Exactly.
And they're dealing with horrible,
violent
sides
people
of society, you know?
They're probably not wanting to see whoever this person is that they have to keep track of.
I'm sure they were afraid of Kenneth. It seems like everybody who came in contact with him was afraid of him. He was a very big, brooding presence.
Yeah. I want to say I hope that there isn't another one out there, but there's thousands probably just in this city.
Probably. And he was right where I grew up.
That's so bad.
Which is the whole reason I wanted to do this case, but now I'm like, fuck him. Like, anyways, that was Kenneth McDuff.
I know you wanted to bring this to our listeners since the beginning because I think you mentioned there's some stuff that went down in my hometown. Yep. Is this the one that you have been talking about the whole time?
This is one of them.
One of them.
I have another that'll probably go on a mini episode.
Okay. And then you said that there's the yogurt shop.
Yeah, the yogurt shop murders is one I have scheduled for later. Okay. That happened in Austin, Texas, exactly the same time as McDuff. That's the scary part. Like you said earlier, there were 2 out there.
And those are just the ones we knew about. Always be aware of your surroundings. This poor lady couldn't even wash her car.
Yeah, she was just out washing her car and going to her boyfriend's house right after. Mm-hmm. And she was just taken.
Yep. Well, R.I.P. to all the girls and good riddance to him.
Yes.
And thank you for this episode, Kendra.
Yeah, I don't know. We never know what to say after like dark episodes. It just sucks. The world is a dark, scary place, but we have been here for a while and we're doing pretty well considering we're hungover.
I hate admitting that because actually, you know what? I'm going to take that back. I felt that way for like a second and now I'm fine.
We got our second wind.
Yeah.
But we're going to go get some food and
Yes.
we're going to come back and record another episode. It's really windy outside.
It is. We can hear it from in here. It's like,
It's been a little creepy. Colorado can't make up its mind on the weather. So
yes.
I was hoping we could go take a walk, but we'll see.
Alrighty, guys. Thank you for listening. Please send in your lab reports or mini episode suggestions to lucidlabpodcast@gmail.com, or you can mail anything to P.O. Box 251 East Lake, Colorado 80614.
And please check us out on all the social media sites. We're on TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, all at Lucid Lab Podcast, one word.
Yes.
And please rate us wherever you listen.
Yes, and suggest us to a friend.
I don't have anything funny to say.
I know. We're tired.
We're tired.
We said all the funny things yesterday during our card
Cards
game.
with Humanity. We'll see you in a couple hours again.
Yeah.
And in the meantime,
Stay lucid.
bye.
Adios.